Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep. So before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel also. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I got the apartment keys on a Monday afternoon right after signing the lease in a cramped real estate office. I stood outside the building for a moment staring at its chipped paint and tall windows, and I felt an odd rush of anticipation. Though landlord told me it had been vacant for years, but the rent was cheap and the location was perfect for my new job. I didn't question it much at first. I just wanted a place to crash. I was 33, new to the city, and not in the mood to hunt for anything else. It seemed convenient, and that was enough for me. When I first walked in, the apartment smelled stale, like old furniture and dust. The living room was bigger than I expected, but the light fixture on the ceiling didn't have a bulb. There was a ceiling fan, but it looked rusted and stuck in place. A single couch sat in the corner, covered in a thick layer of dust. Next to it, an old floor lamp leaned to one side, missing its shade. The kitchen was narrow, with outdated cabinets and a refrigerator that hummed in a low, uneven drone. I tried the stove. 2 of the burners worked, the others clicked but never lit. I noticed a single wall-mounted phone in the hallway. It was one of those old rotary models with a faded beige color. The cord was twisted, the plastic worn near the earpiece. I wondered why it was still there. I assumed it was dead, a leftover from decades ago. I tapped the dial expecting nothing. Then I heard a dial tone that startled me for a second. I picked up the receiver again and listened closely. The tone was strong, clear. I hung up and shrugged it off, thinking maybe the line was still somehow active. I didn't care much about it at the time. That first night, I barely slept. I don't know if it was the new surroundings or the thick, musty air, but I kept waking up a couple of times. I thought I heard noises in the hallway. It sounded like someone moving around in the dark. Each time I switched on my phone's flashlight, got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. No one was there. Of course, just the empty corridor leading to the front door on one end, and the small guest room on the other. I chalked it up to my nerves. The next morning I went to work. I stayed late, caught up in a rush of new responsibilities. By the time I came back to the apartment, it was almost 9 at night. The building was quiet. The hallway lights were weak, flickering in a few spots. I opened my door, turned on the overhead in the living room, and started taking off my jacket. That's when the phone rang. It wasn't a gentle ring. It was loud. An old school rattle that echoed through the empty rooms. I stood there, jacket half off, staring at it. Nobody knew I lived there yet. I hadn't given the number to anyone. Hell, I didn't even know the number. Curiosity got the best of me. I picked it up. Hello? I waited, no response. I heard static. Maybe some faint shuffling on the other end, but no voice. Hello, I repeated. There was a pause. It sounded like breathing, or at least some low, muffled sound. Then a click call ended. I felt a prickly sensation at the back of my neck. My heart rate sped up a little. I set the receiver down and listened to the silence. I told myself it was a wrong number, probably a telemarketer. No big deal, but my mind wouldn't let it go. It seemed off. The phone rang again the next day around noon, just before I left for work. Same scenario. I picked up, said hello, heard nothing but a bit of static and maybe a soft rasp. Then the click. I cursed under my breath and slammed the receiver down. It gave me an uneasy feeling, but I didn't have time to dwell on it. I hurried out, determined to ignore it. That evening after work, I ran into the building superintendent, Mr. Davidson. He was an older man, short, with thick glasses. He was hauling a bucket of tools up the stairs. I asked him how long the apartment had been empty before I moved in. He said it had been vacant for years, maybe 5 or 6, possibly longer. I asked if anyone ever had the phone line connected. He shook his head, said no, the place hadn't been occupied, so there shouldn't be an active line. I told him it was working. Anyway, he shrugged, told me the building's wiring was old and full of surprises. That night, the phone calls came twice. Both times I answered and got the same routine, some kind of faint breathing. Maybe a muffled sound, then a click. I felt uneasy. I started pacing the hallway after the second call, checking every corner and closet. Everything was empty, just dusty floors and bare walls. I left the phone off the hook for a while, hoping it might stop whoever was on the other end. Eventually, I put it back. Silence for about an hour and then another ring. This time, I let it ring until it stopped. The apartment felt darker than usual. My stomach was tense. I felt beads of sweat forming on my forehead. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and sat near the phone, just waiting. It didn't ring again that night. The next day, I called the phone company from work. I wanted to see if I could get some info after a lengthy wait on hold. A representative said the line was still assigned to a person named Jay Wright. No first name, just an initial. The rep said the account showed no activity for years. The bills were apparently paid automatically from some account that hadn't been updated in forever. The rep wouldn't give me more details. They sounded as puzzled as I was. I asked if they could disconnect the line. They said they couldn't, to it without the account holder's permission. I argued for a while but got nowhere. The phone calls continued every day, sometimes during daylight, sometimes late at night, each time the same silent treatment. I started answering the calls with anger, almost yelling into the receiver, "Who the hell is this?" I'd say, "What do you want?" No response, just static and that odd sense of someone breathing, then click. My frustration grew. I tried ignoring the rings, but the sound cut through the silence of the apartment in a way that was almost unbearable. My sleep got worse. I heard footsteps in the apartment at night, or at least I thought I did. They were faint, but I couldn't ignore them. I checked every room, flipping on lights and scanning corners. Nothing moved. The phone's ringing became something I dreaded. Even when it wasn't ringing, I caught myself flinching at any electronic hum. My heart pounded every time I walked past the phone, like it might jump off the wall and start ringing right in my ear. One evening, about a week into this, I came home early. The sun was still up, shining through the tall windows. I decided to take a closer look around the apartment top to bottom. I opened every cabinet, checked every closet, looked for any sign that someone else had access. The bathroom was grimy with cracked tiles and a mirror that never looked clean. I found nothing. No secret doors, no hidden passages, just old empty spaces. I called Mr. Davidson again and asked about the key situation. He insisted that all sets of keys were accounted for. I even changed the lock on my front door just in case. That night the phone rang at around 11 p.m. I was lying on the couch dozing off with the TV. On the ring startled me. I shot up, heart racing. I stared at the phone. My hands felt clammy. I answered it with a trembling voice, same static, same breathing, same click. I felt anger flood my body. I gripped the receiver until my knuckles turned white. My temples throbbed. I caught myself yelling into the deadline. Nothing. I hung up and turned on all the lights in the apartment. I sat in the living room with a lamp pointed toward the phone. Like I was interrogating a suspect. I didn't sleep at all that night. A few days later, I managed to track down the real estate agent who leased me the place. I asked her if she knew anything about the previous tenant. She looked surprised that I was digging around. She said the last recorded occupant was some older man. She didn't know if that was Jay Wright or someone else. She told me that the person had disappeared. No notice, no forwarding address. The apartment stayed vacant. No one had tried to rent it in years. Then the listing came up through the property's owners, who offered a discount to get it rented fast. She shrugged, said that was all she knew. I told her about the phone calls. She looked uncomfortable, but she didn't show much reaction. She said maybe it was a line glitch or a neighbor's call redirecting. She suggested I call a technician. That was the end of our conversation. I left feeling frustrated. I tried calling a phone repair service. They sent a guy who arrived in the late afternoon. He was tall, wore a tool belt, and seemed competent. He unscrewed the phone. Jack in the hallway fiddled with the wiring. He confirmed that the phone was indeed active. He said the line led out of the building into the main junction box, and from there it was a standard connection, but he couldn't tell me who was calling. He tested the line, dialed a few numbers, told me everything was normal. He offered to replace the phone with a more modern one. I declined. I wasn't sure if that would solve the problem he left, and I felt like nothing had changed that evening. I tried something new when the phone rang. I picked it up and didn't speak. I just held the receiver to my ear. Listening for several seconds, there was nothing. Then I heard that muffled breathing again, like someone was pressing the phone against their mouth. My stomach turned. I could feel sweat forming on the back of my neck. My throat felt dry. I tried to focus on any detail I could pick up. Was there background noise? Was there a radio or TV? I only heard static, a few crackles, and that breathing. I whispered, "Who are you?" Silence, then a click. My hands were shaking when I hung up. The calls became more frequent, sometimes 5 or 6 times in an evening. It became impossible to ignore my work performance suffered because I was constantly on edge. I started to dread coming home. The apartment felt colder at night, even though the heaters were on. I kept checking the thermostat and it would read a normal temperature, but my skin felt clammy and my breath felt heavier, like the air was thicker. I told Mr. Davidson about the calls again. He gave me the same shrug, said it was strange, but he had no explanation. He offered to come up and check the place. We did a quick walkthrough. He tested the phone himself, calling his cell phone. It worked normally. "See," he said. As if that proved everything was fine. I couldn't argue with his logic. The calls that bothered me weren't happening in front of him. I started unplugging the phone at night. That helped me get some rest, even though I felt a bit uneasy about it. During the day, I'd plug it back in half, hoping it was over. The phone would ring again sooner or later, and I'd feel that same surge of stress and confusion. No matter what I did, I couldn't trace the calls. I couldn't talk to whoever was calling the phone. Company wouldn't shut off the line. It felt like I was trapped in someone else's unfinished business. I began to suspect that the old Tenant J, Wright, or whoever it was, might be behind this. But that didn't make sense if they had disappeared. Maybe some friend or relative still had the number, but why breathe into the phone and hang up? Why call so many times a day? It felt malicious, like someone wanted to mess with my head. I checked the locks, constantly made sure my windows were closed. I heard noises in the corridor sometimes, but whenever I looked, it was empty. One night around midnight, the phone rang again. I answered, feeling my heart pound. "Hello," I said. I heard that ragged breathing. I swallowed and forced myself to speak calmly. "Listen, I don't know who you are, but I want this to stop." I waited. The breathing continued, heavy and close. My palms were sweaty against the receiver. "Talk to me or stop calling." I heard a faint mumble, like a voice trying to form a word. Then a harsh burst of static, followed by the usual click. My knees felt weak. I steadied myself against the wall. Something about that mumble gave me chills. It reminded me of someone trying to say my name, but I wasn't sure I left the phone on the hook this time. Partly out of defiance and partly out of exhaustion, I paced the living room waiting for another ring, but it didn't come. The next morning I woke up early feeling agitated. I grabbed a coffee at the corner shop and headed to work. I told a coworker about the calls. He shrugged it off, said I should just get rid of the phone. I tried to explain I didn't control the account, but he didn't get it. I felt alone in this problem when I came home that night. I realized I was shaking as I unlocked my door. The hallway was quiet. I set my stuff down and waited a few minutes. Later, the phone rang. I picked it up, heart thudding. No one spoke. Then I heard what sounded like a faint sigh. Click. I slammed the phone down and almost threw it across the hallway. I wanted to rip it out of the wall. Instead, I picked it up and unplugged it. I coiled the cord around it, stuck it in the closet, and shut the door. That was it. I decided I wasn't dealing with it anymore. If someone wanted to call, they could call. I wouldn't hear it. I don't know what will happen next. Every time I walk by that closet, I half expect to hear a muffled ring from behind the door. Part of me wants to leave the apartment and find another place. Another part of me feels stubborn. I paid for this lease. I'm not running still. I can't relax. It's like I'm waiting for the moment that the phone rings, even when it's not plugged in. I keep thinking about that possibility and it makes my mouth go dry. My heartbeat jumps. Just imagining it, I'm still here. I haven't answered another call since I tossed the phone in the closet, but every night I sit in my living room hearing the low hum of the refrigerator and the creaks in the old walls, wondering if the calls will come back. I don't know if there's a real person behind it or if it's something else entirely. All I know is that each time that phone, it felt like someone was on the other side holding their breath until the last second, then deciding to vanish. I can't say I've solved anything, I'm just living with it. The apartment still feels abandoned despite my furniture and belongings scattered around. The dust doesn't seem to go away no matter how much I clean. The nights are long and quiet. I'm always listening for any new sound so far. It's just my own anxious breathing and the echo of thoughts. I can't shut off if the phone rings again. I'm not sure what I'll do, but I'm here waiting and I can't pretend it doesn't bother me. I never expected to feel genuine fear in my own apartment. I had always trusted my building. It's not fancy and it doesn't have a doorman, but it's in a central neighborhood where foot traffic seems constant. I live on the top floor, which I've always told myself is an advantage because there are fewer people passing by. I thought I was being careful by moving in here. I work late and I get home when the hallways are quiet. Most nights I walk into my studio, lock the door, and head straight for the shower. But sometimes I cut corners thinking nobody's around to see anything. That's exactly what got me into trouble. It was a Wednesday night, I remember that, because I had stayed overtime to finish an urgent project by the time I left work. The streets were almost empty, my eyes were burning from staring at the computer, and my shoulders ached from sitting all day. Walking into my building, I noticed nothing unusual. The stairwell lights were dim as usual, and the elevator was out of service again. I trudged up 4 flights of stairs, cursing under my breath about the landlord's lack of maintenance, and still I felt safe. I'd been there for a year and nothing ever happened. People come and go, minding their own business. I reached my studio door, rummaged for my key, and let myself in. The place is tiny. It has a small open-area living space with a kitchenette in the corner, plus a cramped bathroom separated by a flimsy door. I always told myself that if anyone ever came in, I'd hear them right away. The walls are thin and the floor cracks. But that night I was on autopilot. I set my bag down by the table, kicked off my shoes, and noticed how sweaty I felt from walking up all those stairs. All I wanted was a quick shower before bed. I have this bad habit of leaving the door half open when I'm showering. I started doing it months ago because the bathroom doesn't have great ventilation, and I get sick of the hot, humid air. Also, I guess I thought no one would bother climbing the stairs to this floor. The building might be in a busy area, but the upper floors are usually dead silent. I pulled my shirt off, threw it on a chair, and stepped into the bathroom. As usual, I didn't bother turning the lock. I just left the front door sitting against the frame, not fully closed. Water pressure in my unit is surprisingly good, so I stood under the hot stream for a minute, letting it wash away the stress of the day. After I'd been in there for maybe a minute or two, I heard a strange clicking sound. It wasn't loud, but it was distinct enough to cut through the noise of the shower. My first thought was that I'd left something on the stove, or maybe something fell off the countertop in the kitchenette. But it didn't sound like a dish breaking. It sounded more like a door being nudged or a hinge squeaking. My heart fluttered. I turned off the water for a second and stood there dripping. Listening at first, I didn't hear anything else, so I shrugged it off and turned the water back on. Then I heard another noise like a soft scraping. It felt like someone was trying to move something heavy across the floor without drawing attention. My chest got tight and my mind started racing. It occurred to me that I had left the front door unlatched. I slammed the shower handle off, stepped out quietly, and grabbed a small towel. The temperature difference between the steamy bathroom and the cooler living area made me shiver. My studio was dark except for the overhead light in the bathroom, which cast a dim glow out into the living space. I tiptoed toward the doorway, trying to see around the corner without revealing myself. The first thing I noticed was that one of my drawers was open all the way. I keep an old dresser along the wall, and the top drawer was hanging out with a couple of shirts dangling over the edge. That drawer is usually closed. It seemed like someone had rummaged through it. My gut clenched and my hand started shaking. I felt a rush of cold panic sweep from my shoulders down to my stomach. I reached for my phone on the bathroom counter, but it wasn't there. I realized I'd left it in my jacket pocket by the door. I could hear footsteps. They were very light, almost like the person was wearing socks. Each soft thud pressed into the wood. Moving slowly, my instincts told me to stay quiet, but another part of me wanted to shout at whoever was in there. I was stuck between these two urges, standing there in a towel, dripping water onto the floor, I decided to inch forward. Just enough to peek out from my position, I could see the small kitchenette table. My wallet was still on top of it. Right where I'd left it. That was odd. If someone had come in to steal valuables, the wallet would be the first thing to grab. I didn't see anything else out of place in that area, but I could tell that one of the cabinet doors was half open. It looked like the intruder was searching for something in my studio, but not money. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it pulsing in my ears. My towel felt like it was about to slip. I kept adjusting my grip, trying to hold it in place. I took a few more careful steps forward, my feet sticking slightly to the damp bathroom tiles. I leaned around the corner, expecting to see someone standing near the dresser or behind the small couch I have by the wall. But I didn't see a person. I did see more evidence of a search. My second drawer was ajar and a pair of socks was on the floor. The top of the dresser was cleared and some papers I usually keep there were scattered. I heard more light footsteps, but I couldn't pinpoint their location. Suddenly, there was a tiny click from the kitchen area, like something being set down on the countertop, or maybe the fridge handle. Moving, my pulse spiked again. I wanted to call for help, but I didn't want to startle the intruder. I wondered if they were armed. I thought about the things in my drawers, just closed spare cables, maybe an old phone charger. Nothing that would interest a thief unless they were looking for something specific. I had no idea what they could be after keeping low. I edged toward the intercom on the wall beside the kitchen entrance. I didn't have a great line of sight on the living area from that angle, so I kept checking over my shoulder. My hands were wet and shaking. I reached the intercom panel, which is an older system with a simple dial to reach the superintendent's line. I turned the dial carefully, hoping it wouldn't squeak before I pressed the button. I paused to listen. The footsteps were behind me. Now maybe on the other side of the couch, my finger hovered over the intercom button. My mind was racing with a million scenarios. Should I try to confront them? Should I run outside for help? The hallway was pitch black at that hour, and I'd be half naked. That didn't feel like a great option. I pressed the intercom button, and the unit let out a faint buzz. I waited, but no one responded right away. The footsteps in the living area stopped. My breath caught in my throat. It felt like the intruder heard the buzz and froze. I pressed the button again and tried to speak as quietly as I could, but my voice still echoed in my head. I whispered, "Hey, it's me in 402. There's someone in my apartment pickup." It took a moment, but the superintendent or syndico answered with a groggy voice. I could tell I'd woken him up. I whispered again, "There's someone inside. I heard them." "I'm not kidding. Can you come up?" he asked. "Right now, are you sure there's someone there?" I was so tense I could barely speak. I hissed back, "Yes, please." While I was still on the intercom, I noticed something. The rustling sounds and footsteps stopped. I didn't hear anything at all. My apartment was suddenly silent. I wondered if the intruder had left while I was focused on the call. That would have meant walking right behind me to get to the door, which seemed impossible. The superintendent mumbled that he'd be right up. I hung up. I stood there for a few seconds, holding my breath, straining to hear any movement. Nothing. My towel was starting to slip from my waist, so I tightened it. My skin was cooling down, and I began to feel goosebumps on my arms. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as if expecting a sudden grab from behind. My entire body was tense. I decided to edge back into the main living space and see if the intruder was gone. I stepped in front of my dresser and looked around. The drawers were definitely messed up. I saw shirts, socks, and papers spilled on the floor. I turned toward the small coffee table near my couch. It looked normal. The wallet was still on the kitchen table. Then I noticed the curtains by the window moving slightly. There was no breeze in the room, but the window was open just a crack. It had been closed earlier. I felt a jolt in my chest. That window leads out onto a narrow ledge that wraps around part of the building. It's not a real balcony, just a ledge. Wide enough for maintenance workers. I stared at that open window, trying to see if the intruder had climbed out. Was it possible they were on the ledge, or had they moved to another apartment? I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. I approached the window, moving slowly, afraid to look out. The ledge was dark, and all I could see were some old cigarette butts and a dusty surface. If the intruder had climbed out, I had no idea where they could have gone next. It wouldn't be hard to move along that ledge to a neighboring unit. especially if they were desperate. The thought of someone clinging to the side of the building inches from my apartment made my stomach churn. I felt too exposed, standing there in just a towel. I hurried back to my dresser and pulled out a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. I changed quickly, still glancing at the window. Every other second, my mind was trying to piece it all together. Someone broke in, ignored my wallet, shuffled through my drawers, left the window open, and then vanished. I kept thinking, what the hell were they looking for? Why didn't they take any money? A minute later, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. I went to the door and unlocked it fully, letting the superintendent in. He's an older man, balding, wearing a bathrobe and slippers. He carried a small flashlight. His eyes widened when he saw the state of my dresser. He asked if I was sure they didn't steal anything. I told him that my wallet was still on the table, and as far as I could tell, my phone and laptop were untouched. I explained the noises I heard and how I spotted the open window. We both walked carefully around the studio, checking corners and closets. It's a small place, so it didn't take long to confirm that no one was still inside. The superintendent leaned out the window, shining his flashlight along the ledge. From what I could see, there was no sign of anyone standing out there. The flashlight beam just revealed the dusty concrete and the dark expanse of the building's exterior. The night air was still. There was no sign of forced entry on my front door either. The latch wasn't broken, it was just never locked. I felt stupid for leaving it like that, but I also felt unnerved that someone had decided to walk in and rummage around. We didn't find anything out of place except for the scattered clothes and papers. Nothing was missing. At least as far as I could tell in that moment. Still, the superintendent suggested I file a police report in case I discovered items missing. Later, he offered to check the security cameras in the lobby. Unfortunately, our building only has a camera covering the front entrance, and it's pretty low quality. I realized the chances of catching a clear image of the intruder were slim to none. He left to go downstairs and see if any other doors had been tampered with. I locked my door this time. I also slid the chain lock across for extra security. I grabbed my phone from my jacket pocket and noticed a text from a coworker, but that was from earlier in the evening. No new messages, no missed calls. I thought about calling the police right away, but I also felt too shaky to handle it. I didn't know what to tell them, that someone had come in, looked around and left without taking anything. It sounded bizarre. Still, it was real. My hands were still trembling. I decided to check every drawer and closet more thoroughly. I wanted to confirm nothing was missing. I found my passport, my old watch, and some random documents all intact. My laptop was untouched under a pile of clothes on the couch. Everything of obvious value seemed to be there. The only disturbing detail was that someone had obviously gone through my personal items. I could see the signs of rummaging things out of place, certain shirts and pants pulled out and left on top, old receipts scattered. It wasn't random chaos, it looked like a search, but I couldn't imagine what they'd been looking for after triple checking the apartment. I sat down on my couch. The tension in my muscles made everything hurt. I stared at the window. The possibility that the intruder had escaped through there was frightening. Maybe they were still in the building, lurking in someone else's apartment, or hiding in the stairwell. I felt uneasy staying there, but I didn't want to leave and risk running into them in the hallway. I kept looking at the door, half expecting it to swing open again. Eventually, the superintendent came back with the news that he didn't see any clear tampering on the other floors, and the front door camera didn't show anything suspicious. Of course, if someone had followed me in when I entered, they might never have been clearly caught on camera. He suggested I keep the door locked at all times and file that report in the morning. He seemed concerned, but also looked like he'd seen enough strange incidents in his years on the job to not be entirely surprised. That night, I barely slept. Every little sound in the building made me jolt awake. I kept checking the window in the hallway through the peephole. The idea that someone had been in my personal space, rummaging through my stuff looking for something unknown, stuck with me. I couldn't shake the feeling that they might come back. I locked every window and door. I even blocked the door orc knob with a chair, which probably wouldn't help if someone was determined. But it gave me a tiny bit of comfort. In the end, I didn't find out who it was or what they were searching for. The police came the next day, took a quick statement, and told me they'd keep an eye out for similar incidents, but they didn't have much to go on. No one else in the building reported missing items, and there weren't any obvious signs of forced entry anywhere. It became one of those unsolved, uneasy experiences that left me feeling on edge. Even now, I can't leave my door unlocked for a second, and when I think about that open window and the sound of soft footsteps, I get a chill. I'll never again assume that I'm safe. Just because I'm on the top floor, I wasn't planning on spending my summer in a creaky old house, but I had no choice. Once I found out I inherited the place from an uncle I never really knew on the day I arrived, I felt uneasy. The exterior looked sturdy, but I couldn't ignore the strange atmosphere inside. It smelled like old wood and stale air. The halls were narrow and the rooms felt cramped, even though they had plenty of space. I remember thinking something didn't add up. The layout of the walls seemed off. Some hallways were too short and one closet stuck out at an odd angle. It was like there was space behind that closet, but it didn't show up on any visible plan of the house. I walked around, tapping on the walls and floors, searching for hollow spots. I felt a strong urge to explore. Every inch, something was telling me the place wasn't as simple as it looked. I placed my bags in what used to be my uncle's bedroom. The furniture was large and heavy, with a solid wooden bed frame and a bulky dresser. I opened the dresser drawers to see if he had left anything behind. Mostly I found old clothes and a few moth-eaten blankets. Nothing unusual. The wardrobe smelled a bit musty, but that's normal in an old house. There were no pictures or personal items around, no diaries or letters. The walls were bare except for a coat of faded paint. The windows rattled a bit in the wind, and there was a persistent draft. Even though I closed everything, I noticed the corner of the room was slightly darker than the rest, but I didn't see any mold on the surface. Still, the air felt heavier there, almost like I was stepping into a different space. Whenever I went close to that corner, I spent my first night trying to get comfortable. The bed creaked every time I turned over, and the darkness made the house's sounds more pronounced. I heard a drip from somewhere, but I couldn't locate it. Floorboards settled and groaned. In the night, I got up once to check the hallway. I stepped on a loose plank near the bedroom door, and the sudden noise gave me a jolt. My mouth felt dry, so I grabbed a glass of water in the kitchen on my way back. I passed by that odd closet that I'd noticed earlier. I paused and just stared at it. I was half asleep, but I swore. I felt a bit of cool air coming through the cracks around the frame. It made me think that there might be some hidden area behind that wall. I tried to forget it and went back to bed, but the curiosity stayed with me the next morning. I inspected that closet more carefully. It was about 3 feet deep, with a rod for hanging coats. There were 2 shelves and an overhead space that was too high for me to see without a stool. I grabbed a small flashlight from my bag and shined it on every angle. The wood paneling was solid, but showed a few scuff marks near the edges, like someone had been pulling at it or scraping it. I knocked on it a few times. The sound was hollow. I took a step back and looked at the corridor behind. If I imagined the floor plan, there should have been no space left behind that wall. Yet my knock suggested otherwise. I started to poke around the edges, trying to see if there were any hidden seams. I found a spot that looked like it had been pried open before the paint was chipped, and the wooden panel looked a bit loose at the corner. It was enough for me to slip my fingertips in. I pulled gently, and the edge came away from the wall by about an inch. I felt a surge of adrenaline. My heart thumped. It wasn't every day you discover a possible hidden passage in your own house. I pressed my ear to the gap, but I couldn't hear anything. There was a faint musty smell that reminded me of damp basement. I tugged again, and the panel gave way with a creak. I shone my flashlight inside. It revealed a small tunnel-like space behind the closet. The walls were rough with wooden beams that looked unfinished. Dust floated in the flashlight beam. The space was dark, maybe 4 feet wide. It stretched a few feet in, then ended at what looked like another wall. I crouched and slipped inside. The smell was stronger, like mildew, and something else I couldn't identify. It reminded me of stale smoke, the kind that lingers in old bars or empty motel rooms. My family doesn't smoke, and as far as I knew, my uncle never did. Either that odor felt out of place, I crawled along the narrow gap, shining the light on every surface. About halfway through, I spotted scratch marks on the wooden beams. They looked like someone had dragged something metallic across them. The marks were scattered and irregular, not neat lines. Some went in diagonal directions, others looked more like scrapes or gouges. Seeing them made me uneasy. I wondered if someone had tried to get out of there or if they were just random damage from repairs. I also noticed crumpled plastic wrappers on the floor. They looked old, not modern packaging. The print was faded and I couldn't read the labels. My flashlight caught a small metal can, maybe a soup can covered in rust. Everything felt decades old, but I couldn't guess how many I reached the far end. There was a rectangular piece of wood leaning against the interior wall when I pushed it aside. It led me into another hidden space. This one was more like a tiny room. It was maybe 6 feet by 6 feet with low ceilings. There was no furniture. There was a single dusty light bulb fixture above, but no chain or switch. I could see the walls had more scratches, and there were what looked like burn marks in one corner, like someone had pressed a hot metal object there. The smell of mold was so strong it made me cough. My throat felt scratchy. I shone my flashlight around trying to see if there was any sign of who had been in here. I saw a pile of old newspapers in one corner, folded up with some empty tin cans. Next to those cans were cigarette butts. Some were half smoked, others were just filters. It was all ancient, layered in dust. I felt my stomach tighten. The idea that someone used this space as a hiding spot or a living area disturbed me. I crouched down to look more closely at the newspapers, but they were too brittle when I touched them. They crumbled. The print was faded. I could only make out a few letters here and there. One of the cans had a label that looked like it might have been from the 1970s or earlier. I remembered my uncle mentioning that the house was built by his grandfather, so it had been in the family for a long time. Maybe someone used this hideaway for storage, but the presence of cigarette butts and those scratch marks made me think it was more than that. I felt goosebumps rising on my arms and the back of my neck felt prickly. The air was stale breathing. Felt harder in that cramped room. My flashlight's beam revealed more scuff marks on the floorboards as if a heavy object had been pushed around. I felt an urge to leave, but curiosity pushed me to keep examining everything. I found a metal rod leaning in a corner. It was about 2 feet long with a jagged edge. At one end, it looked like a broken curtain rod or part of a fireplace poker holding. It made me uneasy. I pictured someone sitting in that cramped area, smoking cigarette after cigarette, scraping that rod against the walls. My heartbeat got louder in my ears. The place felt claustrophobic. My head started to pound, and I thought I might be breathing in mold spores. I decided to step back out into the main corridor for some fresh air when I turned around, though I felt a chill run down my spine like I was being watched. I spun my flashlight, quickly shining it around the small room. There was nothing there. I told myself I was alone, but I couldn't shake that creepy sensation once I crawled back through the narrow passage and emerged into the closet. I felt relief. I took a deep breath of the hallway's air, which was stale in its own way, but nowhere near as suffocating as that hidden chamber. My hands shook a bit. I slid the panel back in place, then stood up. My clothes were dusty and my knees felt stiff. I looked down at my fingers and saw smudges of dirt and a few small splinters. The closet door was still open, revealing the empty space where I'd just gone. I quickly shut the door, more out of instinct than anything else. I spent the rest of the day trying to focus on practical chores. I cleaned up the kitchen, made sure the plumbing worked, and tested the lights in every room. But I couldn't stop thinking about that hidden area. I debated whether to seal it up for good. Part of me wanted to forget it existed. Another part wanted to document everything. Maybe call someone to investigate. Then I realized I didn't even know who to call the police. Wouldn't come for something like this unless I had a reason to suspect a crime. There was no immediate sign of a crime anyway, just a weird secret room with old trash and scratch marks. I thought maybe I should check the local records or talk to a neighbor, but I wasn't sure if that would do any good that evening. I found myself standing near that closet again. I was drawn to it against my better judgment. The house was quiet, the sun was setting, and the hallway was dim. I still smelled that faint hint of cigarette smoke lingering around the panel. It made my stomach clench. Nobody had smoked in this house for as long as I'd been alive. As far as I knew, the smell must have soaked into the wood, or maybe there was still something hidden in there. I opened the closet door, half expecting to see something or someone. It was just the same empty closet. I hesitated before pressing on the loose panel. I could feel the cool air seeping through the gap again. My palms started to sweat. I closed the closet door instead of going in. My mind was racing with possibilities, but I needed time to digest everything. I decided to sleep on it and figure out a plan in the morning. That night I had trouble resting. My head was full of images of that cramped space every time I closed my eyes. I pictured the scratch marks. I also recalled those old wrappers and cigarette butts. It bothered me that someone might have stayed there without my uncle ever mentioning it, unless he didn't know, or maybe he did and never told anyone. The house creaked and groaned again. Each sound made me tense up. Around midnight, I got out of bed and checked the hallway. I used the flashlight on my phone because I didn't want to turn on the overhead lights. Everything looked normal. The closet door was still shut. I felt a weird desire to open it, but I resisted. My body was on alert, like I was waiting for something to happen. I stood there breathing slowly, ears straining for any noise. All I heard was the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. Eventually, I went back to bed, still restless. The next day, I woke up with a headache. The first thing on my mind was that compartment. I had to explore it in daylight. So I forced myself to eat a quick breakfast, then grabbed my flashlight gloves and a little pry bar. I wanted to check the walls inside that hidden room more thoroughly. Maybe there was a door hatch I missed. I entered the closet, opened the panel, and crawled back inside. Daylight streamed through the cracks in the outside walls, giving me just enough light to see dust particles floating around it. It was strange, but I noticed a slight draft. It felt like air was coming from somewhere else. I aimed my flashlight at each corner, looking for a gap or opening. I didn't see any large holes, just the edges where the beams met. The scratch marks looked even more erratic in the daylight. Some were deep, and I ran my finger over one. It felt rough. My heart pounded harder, and I sensed an overwhelming tension when I reached the tiny room. I inspected the walls more closely. The burn marks had a shape like someone pressed around hot metal surface repeatedly, or it could have been from a small heater. I ran my hand over the dark stains. It felt like charred wood, rough to the touch. The smell of cigarette smoke was everywhere, though the cigarette butts I saw yesterday were still there, unchanged. I had trouble breathing, so I opened my mouth to inhale the moldy air. It tasted stale. My stomach churned. I took out my pry bar and tested some of the boards to see if they were loose. A few creaked, but I couldn't lift any. I also checked the ceiling. It was solid. Then I looked at the floor. Part of it felt slightly uneven near the far corner. I pressed my heel on it. It sank maybe half an inch, then stopped. I tried prying that board up, but it wouldn't budge it. Just flexed it. Made a popping noise and then settled back into place. I found no obvious door or trap. I stayed there for what felt like an hour, going over every surface. The tension built up in my chest. My hands were shaking again, and I had to remind myself to breathe the smell, the tight space, the old scraps of paper, and the idea of someone living right behind the walls made my head spin. I felt like I was invading someone's private spot, even if it was abandoned. Eventually, I couldn't stand the claustrophobic feeling anymore. I backed out of the tiny room, crawled through the passage, and returned to the hallway. I went outside. After that, I needed fresh air. I sat on the porch steps staring at the fields. The yard was calm, the sun was warm, and a light breeze moved the tall grass. But I kept picturing that hidden place behind the closet. The house didn't look creepy from the outside. It looked like a regular country home with chipped paint and old shutters. Nobody passing by would guess there was a secret compartment inside. I realized I had a choice. I could try to block it off, seal it, and never go back. Or I could keep investigating, talk to local historians or neighbors, see if anyone knew about this house's past. I felt torn because I wasn't sure I wanted to learn more. The scratch marks and the cigarette smell hinted at something unsettling. Part of me worried someone still had a key. someone who might come back and find me there, but I also knew I couldn't pretend this didn't exist that evening. I tried to relax, but every noise in the house set me on edge. I kept glancing at the corridor. I thought about nailing the panel shut. But then I thought, what if whoever used that space is still around with nailing it shut? Piss them off. I shook my head. It sounded ridiculous, but my nerves were shot. My main plan now is to search the house records at the town hall, see if there are any mentions of modifications or hidden compartments. Maybe I can learn who built that false wall and why, but that will take time. Meanwhile, I'm staying here sleeping in a place that feels wrong. The smell of stale smoke clings to my clothes. Now my nose itches and my throat feels irritated. It's like the mold or dust is slowly affecting me. Every time I think about that hidden room, I feel a tightness in my chest. I can picture someone crouched in there smoking cigarettes in the dark, leaving scratch marks on the walls for reasons I can't guess. I keep expecting to hear movement behind the panels at night. Sometimes I even hold my breath and listen so far I haven't heard anything, but the silence bothers me almost as much as any noise would. I'm worried this might become an obsession. I don't want to spend every waking moment thinking about that compartment, but I also can't ignore it. It's there a few feet away, hidden by a simple wooden panel. I'm hoping I can find answers soon. For now, I'm just taking it one day at a time, checking that closet in the morning to make sure nothing has changed. I keep the door shut at night and sleep with a flashlight on my nightstand. There are times I hear my heart pounding in my ears when I go to bed, and it takes me hours to fall asleep. I've never felt this tense in a house before. Even though it's mine, it doesn't feel like home. Maybe it never will, but I'm not running away. I'll stay and see this through if someone lived in that hidden space. I want to know why. I want to know if they're gone or if they might come back. I can't explain why, but part of me suspects this isn't over until I know the truth. I'll keep my eyes and ears open, and I won't ignore any sign that something else is going on behind those walls. I'm not the kind of person who sees things in the dark and jumps to conclusions. I never believed in stories about apparitions or ghosts. I've worked late shifts countless times, driven home in the dead of night without a second thought, and faced some pretty rough situations on the road, but everything changed. After that night on the way home, it was an ordinary drive that turned into something I still can't fully explain. I saw a woman on the side of the road, and when I stopped to help, she vanished. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened, and I'll let you decide whether you believe me or not. I left work around midnight. It wasn't unusual for me because I often got stuck at the hospital finishing paperwork or helping out. If someone from the night shift needed an extra hand, I'm not a doctor or a nurse. I work in administrative support, but sometimes I stay a bit longer to assist with some tasks. That night I felt more tired than usual. My eyes were heavy and my shoulders ached from sitting at a desk all day, but I was ready to drive home. I wanted my bed and a few hours of sleep before the next day started. I got in my car, turned on the engine, and fiddled with the AC for a moment. The weather was humid and my shirt stuck to my back. I drove through the nearly empty city streets, seeing only a few streetlights and the occasional store sign still lit. I passed one or two cars, but it seemed like most people were already asleep. After a while, I reached the main highway that led toward the outskirts where I live. It's a quiet stretch of road. At night, sometimes I see truckers or a random car, but that night I barely saw anyone. I kept my eyes on the road, but my mind wandered to the events of the day. It wasn't a bad day, just long. I found myself yawning. Every few minutes I turned on the radio, hoping some background noise would keep me more alert. I remember the static at first, then a scratchy music station that played something soft. It wasn't my usual taste, but I let it stay on. I tapped my fingers on the steering wheel, just trying to stay focused enough to get home without drifting around 15 minutes into the drive. I noticed one particular stretch of the highway that's always poorly lit. The lampposts are too far apart, and the road seems darker because of the dense trees on both sides. As I approached that area, my headlights illuminated the asphalt in front of me, but I still felt surrounded by shadows. I gripped the wheel a bit tighter. I never liked that part of the highway, and I often told myself that one day I'd send a complaint to whoever manages that road. It's dangerous to have such poor visibility at night. I was moving at a steady speed, about 50 miles per hour. Not too fast, not too slow. I didn't see any other cars around me. My headlights cut through the darkness and I noticed something on the right side of the road. At first it looked like a shape. Maybe a person standing there. I slowed down a little because it's not common to see someone alone on that stretch at that time. As I got closer, I could see the outline of a woman. She seemed to be in her 20s or maybe early 30s. It's hard to guess in the dark, but that's the impression I got. She wore a simple dress. It looked light-colored under my headlights. Her hair was down. Reaching past her shoulders, she stood facing the road, one arm raised as if trying to flag someone down. My heart picked up a bit. I didn't see a car broken down or anything else that indicated she was in trouble, but I couldn't ignore a person who looked stranded. I slowed down further until I was almost at a crawl, then pulled over to the shoulder. My plan was to roll down the window, ask if she needed help or at least make a call for her. But the moment I stopped, my headlights lit up the spot where I had seen her and there was no one there. I blinked a few times and looked around. My mind kept insisting I had just seen her a second ago. There was no movement, no sound, just empty road and the bushes behind the guardrail. I stared at the place where she should have been. Nothing. My body went tense. I felt a chill move up my arms and I noticed the hair on my forearm stand up. I turned off the radio thinking maybe the quiet would help me concentrate. I rolled down the passenger window and called out, "Hello, is anyone there?" I waited for a response, but all I heard was the faint hum of the car engine and some crickets in the distance. The night was so still it felt unnatural. I sat there for a moment debating what to do. Maybe she ran into the brush. Maybe she got scared when she saw my car slow down. But something didn't add up. There's not much cover there, just some tall grass and a thin line of trees. Still, I couldn't just drive away. My conscience wouldn't let me. I put the car in park, turned on the hazard lights and got out. As soon as I was outside, I felt the night air wrap around me. It was damp and my skin felt clammy. I couldn't see much except what my headlights illuminated. I walked to the front of the car, shining the flashlight from my phone around. I looked left and right along the guardrail. Nothing moved. I stepped a bit closer to the edge, peering into the grass. The darkness went on for several yards before the tree line. I squinted, trying to see if someone was crouching there. I didn't see a single sign of a person. It was as if she had dissolved into thin air. My heart thumped and my mouth felt dry. I called out again, "Hey, if you need help, just say something. I'm not going to hurt you." I waited. The silence made me uneasy. My palms were sweaty, so I switched the phone to my left hand and wiped my right hand on my pants. Still nothing. After about a minute, I started to feel exposed. I kept imagining the possibility of some trick or setup. Like maybe someone wanted to lure me out of my car, but if that was the case, why didn't anyone show themselves? I stood there for another minute scanning the area. Then I heard a rustling noise in the bushes off to the right, but it sounded more like an animal than a person. I stepped toward the sound, but then I thought, this isn't smart. I'm out here alone in the dark with no backup. If there was a real emergency, I would see signs of it. I didn't want to become a victim of a robbery or something worse, so I backed away, keeping my light on the bushes, but nothing came out. I got back in my car, shut the door, and locked it. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and tried to clear my head. I thought maybe I was just exhausted and maybe I imagined the whole thing, but it felt too real. I saw her arm raised her dress, the shape of her face. I can't forget those details. I turned off the hazards, pulled back onto the highway, and continued driving. The rest of the drive felt endless. My chest was tight and I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure appear in the back seat. I turned the interior light on for a second just to be sure no one was there. Of course it was empty. My hands were shaking and I had to focus on keeping the car steady. I was relieved when I started seeing lights from the small town near my neighborhood. As soon as I got home, I locked the door behind me and went straight to the kitchen for a glass of water. My pulse was racing, my throat felt constricted, and my stomach was in knots. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that woman on the side of the road. I kept thinking about her expression, though I only had a fleeting look at her face. It looked neutral, but her eyes seemed focused on me like she wanted me to stop. I kept replaying the scene one moment. She was there the next, she was gone. It made no sense. My rational mind told me I was just tired and seeing things, but I couldn't shake the lingering feeling that something strange had happened the next day at work. I was distracted. My coworkers asked me if I was okay. I just said I didn't sleep well. I didn't want to tell them the real story. I was afraid they'd think I was losing my grip or that I was making something up for attention, but it bothered me so much that I ended up telling one close friend during our lunch break. He listened quietly, then shrugged. People see weird stuff at night. He said, "Your eyes play tricks on you, especially when you're tired." I agreed with him out loud, but inside I still felt unsettled that evening. I worked late again, but I made sure to leave earlier than the previous night. I didn't want to face that road in the same conditions, yet a part of me was curious, like I needed closure. I wondered if I'd see her again or if there'd be some clue about what happened. The drive home was quieter than ever. Every time I approached that dark stretch of highway, my heart sped up. I was tense, gripping the wheel with both hands. My eyes flicked to the shoulder of the road as I passed the spot where I saw her. It looked the same as always. Maybe a little more foreboding because of my memory. There was no one there. After that, I started changing my route. I figured I could take a different road. Even if it meant adding 10 or 15 minutes to my trip, I found myself looking for excuses to avoid that particular part of the highway. Sometimes I told myself I needed to stop for groceries on a different side of town. Other times I said I was just exploring new routes, but I knew the truth. I didn't want to see that apparition again. It freaked me out in a way nothing else ever has. I wasn't ready to deal with another night of restless sleep and sweaty nightmares over the next few weeks. I kept playing the event in my head. I asked myself if it could have been a real person who disappeared into the bushes. That would be possible if she was fast or if I looked away at the exact moment she ran, but I don't think that's what happened. I'm certain I would have heard movement or picked up some clue of a person hiding there. It didn't feel right. There was no sign of anyone, and the whole area was silent. I also considered that I might have hallucinated the whole thing. I was tired. I'd been under a lot of stress at work, but I've never experienced any kind of hallucination before, or since it was too detailed to be a random trick of the eyes. I saw her clothes, her posture, her face. I can still remember the length of her hair and the way she held her arm out. That memory stuck with me. Sometimes late at night, I'd see that image again in my mind. A woman standing in the darkness, asking for help and vanishing. The effect was more than just surprise. It made me question my sense of reality. I spent a few nights reading about tricks of the light illusions and other phenomena that can happen on the road. I found plenty of stories about people who saw hitchhikers that weren't there. Some folks called them ghosts. Others said it was fatigue. Whatever it was, it left a mark. I still drive that highway occasionally when I have no choice. If I leave work too late and can't afford the extra half hour a different route would take, I go through that dark stretch again, but I'm always tense. I keep glancing at the shoulder, half expecting to see her a few times. I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, but whenever I looked, it turned out to be a road sign or just a patch of weeds. My heart pounds every time, and I feel that chill again, recalling the night I stopped for someone who wasn't there to this day. I can't explain it. My routine changed because of it. I don't like passing that spot at night. Even if someone tries to wave me down, I'm not sure I'd have the courage to pull over again. The thought of stepping out of my car and finding nothing there scares me. It's not fear of danger, it's fear of that complete emptiness that doesn't make sense. It's the kind of experience that makes you question what you see and what you think. You know, when people ask why I avoid that part of the highway, I usually joke about it, saying the road conditions are bad or that it's out of the way, but inside I remember how my heart hammered, how my skin felt cold, and how my flashlight showed nothing but tall grass and darkness. I remember driving the rest of the way home in a state of alert, checking my mirrors like I expected a passenger to appear in the back seat. I've seen a lot of strange things while driving at night. Animals crossing debris on the road, broken down cars, but nothing compares to that. It's not something that can be dismissed easily. It's the reason I'm still cautious. Every time I pass a lone figure on the side of the road, I always slow down, but I don't always stop. I can't help remembering that moment when the figure just disappeared. I feel guilty if I leave someone behind who might be in real trouble, but I'm torn because of what happened. The doubt creeps in. Is it real, or is it another vision? That's the story. I don't expect everyone to believe me, but I know what I saw. I still feel that knot in my gut. When I think about it, I still remember gripping the steering wheel, scanning the darkness, and wondering if I had crossed into some area of reality I wasn't supposed to see. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a random thought. It was an actual moment on a deserted stretch of highway with a woman standing there raising her arm for help, and in a split second she was gone now. Whenever it gets late, I keep my eyes on the road and I keep my mind as clear as possible, but I'll always have that memory and I'll always avoid that area if I can because I have no desire to see her again, standing in the shadows waiting for me to stop. And if I do see her again, I'm not sure what I'll do. Maybe I'll floor it and get out of there, or maybe I'll stop one more time, but I'm hoping I never have to make that choice again. I froze the second I saw the footprints. I just pushed open the main gate to my grandfather's old workshop, a place I hadn't set foot in for months, and there they were, clean recent sneaker prints on a layer of thick dust. My throat went dry. I glanced around at the empty street. It was late, the sky was dark, and there weren't many lights on in this rundown neighborhood. The gate creaked in the quiet air. I stepped inside and let the gate swing shut behind me. I stood still for a moment, watching the footprints trail across the concrete floor. I inherited this workshop about a year ago, right after my grandfather passed it down. I'd never found a reason to keep it active, so I locked it up. I didn't bother selling it because it held some sentimental value, and I liked knowing it was still there. If I ever needed a place to tinker, the space was small with an office up front and a larger area in the back for mechanical work. My grandfather used to fix car engines here, build custom parts, and keep a stock of old metal scraps. Now it was dark, quiet, and layered with dust. At least it was supposed to be. I stared at those footprints. They started at the entrance, right where I stood, and led straight to the back of the workshop. Each step was distinct. The prints were spaced out in a way that told me whoever made them was walking calmly, not running or sneaking around. I tried to guess the shoe size, probably not too big, maybe around a men's size 9 or 10, hard to tell, under the dim overhead bulb that still worked near the entrance. The rest of the workshop was mostly shadows. The ceiling lights didn't all function anymore, and I hadn't bothered replacing the bulbs. A musty smell hung in the air, mixed with old engine oil and rust. My pulse felt heavy in my temples. I wasn't sure if I wanted to investigate or just grab my old tools and leave, but I couldn't ignore it. Someone had been in here, or maybe they still were. I pressed the light switch on the wall. Nothing happened that didn't surprise me. I took out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and stepped deeper inside. I could hear my footsteps scuffing the dust. There was a slight echo from the concrete walls. My phone's light cut through the darkness, and I followed the footprints carefully as if they might vanish. If I looked away, the prints went straight to the back corner near the shelves where I used to store spare parts. There was a door in the back that led to a small fenced area behind the building. That door was usually locked. It led to a tiny yard filled with leftover metal scraps, old rims, and crates. Nobody had a reason to go back there. I felt the weight of the silence pressing on me. My ears picked up the faint buzzing of a distant street lamp outside. I stopped at the row of shelves. The footprints turned slightly, then headed to that back door. My phone's beam showed scuffed dust near the threshold, like the person might have paused there. I tried the doorknob. It was locked just like always. I jiggled it a few times. It didn't budge. I shined my phone down at the door's base. There was no sign of forced entry. The small metal lock looked intact. It was an old deadbolt. It could only be locked or unlocked from the inside with a key, and I had that key on my keychain. Nobody else should have had one. My heart started beating harder. I glanced around, checking the walls, the corners of the ceiling. The footprints led here, but they didn't go anywhere else. There weren't any footprints leading away from the door. That made no sense. I squatted down to take a closer look, my eyes sweeping over the floor. The dust was thick, but the prints were unmistakable. I tried to see if maybe they turned around or doubled back, but the prints just stopped at the door. I stood up slowly, feeling sweat on my neck. The silence felt heavier. I decided to check the side door. That door opened to a narrow alley. I had locked it a while back and placed a padlock on the inside. For good measure, I walked over, shining my phone along the way. The rest of the workshop floor was covered in an even layer of dust. No tracks, just these footprints that seemed to appear out of nowhere and vanish at the back door. I felt my stomach tighten. I reached the side door and tested it. The padlock was still there, latched. Everything looked normal. I pushed on the door. It didn't budge. I hadn't seen or heard anyone. I told myself maybe the footprints were older than I thought, but they looked fresh. There was a crisp outline in the dust, almost no blur on the edges. I tried to steady my breathing, but my heart kept racing. My hand felt sweaty around my phone. I walked back to the center of the workshop, scanning the wide-open space. My eyes roamed over the old workbench, a few leftover car parts on the floor, empty shelves and the metal cabinets where we used to store tools. Everything looked exactly how I remembered it, except for those footprints I felt exposed in the middle of that big open room. So I moved over to the workbench. I tried to see if anything looked disturbed. Most of the tools were gone, except for a few large wrenches and a rusted screwdriver. The top of the bench was coated in dust, except for a spot near the edge that looked a little cleaner. It seemed like someone might have put a hand down there recently. I ran my finger across it. The dust was definitely thinner there. My chest tightened again. I swallowed. Noticing my mouth was dry, I was about to grab the old wrenches I came for when I heard a faint metal clank. It sounded like something tapping or banging. Just once my entire body tensed. It came from somewhere behind the shelves near the corner where we used to keep steel pipes. I aimed my phone that way, trying to keep my hand steady. I didn't see movement. I stood there listening, holding my breath. Another soft clank echoed like a piece of metal being nudged. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I wanted to call out, but my throat felt locked. After a few seconds, I forced myself to speak. "Hey, is someone there?" My voice came out quieter than I expected. I waited no response, just that stale air pressing on me. I moved toward the shelves, taking slow steps. Phone raised. I tried to breathe. Steady, my boot scraped against the concrete. I reached the corner and swept the light over the pipes. Metal scraps and a few bins of old bolts. Nothing. No sign of a person. I stood there for a moment, trying to listen for any breathing or rustling. The silence made my ears ring. I slowly checked behind each shelf, stepping around crates, lifting the phone high and low. No one was there. I was alone, or at least I couldn't see anyone. I felt a chill on my arms. Even though it wasn't cold, I rubbed my sleeve. Trying to calm down, I turned around, scanning the entire workshop again. My eyes landed on a small office door near the front. It was a wooden door with a foggy glass panel. That office used to be where my grandfather kept his records and receipts. I realized I hadn't checked it yet. If someone was hiding, that was another possible spot. Part of me wanted to grab my tools and bolt, but I felt this urge to make sure I wasn't missing something. I walked to the office door, reaching out with one hand for the knob. My phone's light shook a bit in my other hand. I turned the knob. It was unlocked. I pushed the door open. Inside was a tiny space with a metal desk, an old swivel chair, and some filing cabinets. The windows faced the street, but I had pulled the blinds down months ago. It smelled stale. The desk was covered in dusty papers. There was just enough space to move around. I swept the light across the floor. No footprints there, no sign of disturbance. The only sound was my own breathing. I opened the filing cabinet drawers one by one. They squeaked, just papers and a few random office supplies. I didn't see anything that explained the footprints or the noises. My nerves were on edge. I felt jumpy, like I wanted to keep my back against a wall so I could see everything. I flicked my gaze to the door every few seconds. Nothing moved. Eventually, I stepped back into the main area. I decided I'd spend enough time poking around. I wanted to grab my tools and leave. If there was someone messing around in here, I didn't want to meet them. My left hand was shaking a bit from adrenaline. I took a deep breath and made my way back to the workbench. I picked up the old wrenches I needed. They were heavy in my hand. The metal cold, I tucked them into a small bag I'd brought with me. I looked over at the large chest where my grandfather kept bigger tools. I wondered if I should grab more, but I felt uneasy staying in this place any longer. My mind kept going back to those footprints leading to the back door. It made no sense. I stood by the bench phone in one hand, bag of tools in the other, breathing shallow. Then I heard another metallic knock louder. This time it came from somewhere near the roof. It was like metal pipe shifting. I snapped my gaze upward, pointing the phone's flashlight. I saw the steel beams that supported the roof. Nothing out of place. My pulse pounded. I exhaled, told myself it was probably just the old structure settling. Or maybe something had shifted in the rafters. The workshop wasn't in great shape, and sometimes metal components groaned when the temperature changed. I didn't want to stay and find out if I was right. I walked quickly toward the front door. My boots left their own tracks in the dust, and I could see them intersecting with the footprints that weren't mine. That gave me a weird feeling when I reached the door. I turned around for one last look. The workshop was dark, mostly quiet, except for the faint buzzing from the exterior lamp. The footprints still shone in my phone's light, leading to that locked back door. A wave of unease rippled through my chest. I swallowed and stepped outside. The air felt slightly fresher. I locked the front door behind me, tugging on the handle to make sure it was secure. I walked out to the street, my footsteps echoing on the pavement. The neighborhood was empty. A couple of houses had lights on, but it was close to midnight, so it was mostly silent. I crossed to my car, which I'd parked a few doors down. My shoulders felt tense. I got in, shut the door, and locked it. I placed the tool bag on the passenger seat and started the engine. As soon as I pulled away from the curb, I caught myself checking the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see someone dart out of the workshop behind me, but there was no one on the drive home. I kept thinking about those footprints. I tried to go through every possibility. Maybe a homeless person forced their way in, but that wouldn't explain the locked doors and the intact padlock. Maybe I was seeing older footprints that somehow stayed fresh-looking, but the dust pattern didn't lie. They were recent, and they ended at that locked back door. Whoever it was, they found a way to leave no trace of an exit, or they were still in there somehow. By the time I reached my driveway, I felt drained. My jaw was sore from clenching it the whole way. I turned off the car and sat there for a minute, glancing at the tools in the passenger seat. I realized my palms were sweaty, so I wiped them on my pants. I got out, locked the car, and went inside my house. I dropped the bag on my kitchen table, turned on the lights, and took a deep breath. I was safe at home now, but my thoughts kept returning to the eerie silence of that workshop. I didn't want to overreact. It could have been some random trespasser who managed to sneak out before I arrived. Maybe they climbed out through a small window or found a gap somewhere that I didn't notice. The building wasn't in perfect shape. It had old vents, some boarded up windows near the ceiling, but every scenario I came up with made me uneasy. I remembered that banging metal sound, like something or someone moving around it. Didn't sound accidental. I tossed my keys on the kitchen counter and paced around my living room a bit. Trying to calm down, my heart rate was still elevated. My skin felt clammy. Whenever I closed my eyes, I pictured those footprints ending at the locked door. It left me with this lingering sense that I'd witnessed something impossible. I kept telling myself that it had to be a normal explanation. Maybe a friend of my grandfather's had a key, but I couldn't recall giving copies to anyone. My grandfather never mentioned distributing extra keys, and the place had been closed for so long, I eventually forced myself to sit on the couch and turned on the TV for some background noise. I needed to ground myself. The tension sat in my stomach like a knot. I tried to shake off the unease, but it clung to me. My mind kept replaying the scenario, the footprints, the locked doors, the metallic bangs, the musty air, and the feeling that someone was standing just around a corner. Even now, with the bright lights of my living room, I felt a chill when I remembered that workshop's darkness. I'm not sure if I'll go back soon. I still have the key. I could check it in daylight and see if I missed something obvious. Part of me wants to do that, just to confirm there's no hidden door or hole in the wall, but part of me doesn't want to set foot in there again. It's my grandfather's old place, and it should feel familiar, but it doesn't. It felt strange and occupied by some unseen presence. Maybe it's just my nerves, I don't know. All I know is that last night I saw footprints that shouldn't exist. I heard metal clanking when no one was there. The workshop was locked tight from inside, but somebody managed to move around without leaving any sign of forced entry. The place felt off. I can't explain it any better than that. I grabbed my tools and left, but it felt like I was being watched the entire time. I don't know who it was, and I don't know what they wanted, but I'm sure someone else was there, or maybe they're still there waiting in the dark behind the shelves or up in the rafters. Next time I might not go in alone, or maybe I'll just leave the place as it is locked and forgotten for now. All I have are the tools I needed and a lingering sense of unease that still knots my stomach. Every time I think about it, I never thought I'd be standing in a dark, abandoned restaurant on a damp Tuesday night, trying to figure out who or what was banging on the walls in the basement. I agreed to help my brother with this place because I owed him. He bought the property for a good price, thinking it could be restored, He asked me to keep an eye on it during the renovation period. It sounded easy at first. I figured I would just walk around the building after sunset, check for leaks, and lock the doors. But this job turned into something else. On my first night here, I remember stepping inside around 9 p.m. The front door squeaked and I smelled old cooking oil and mold. The ceiling fans were turned off and the large windows faced a dark, empty street. The place had been closed for years, so the furniture was dusty and piled in corners. I switched on my flashlight, which only lit up a small area around me. The power in the building was unreliable and the overhead lights flickered. Sometimes I tried flipping the main light switch near the entrance, but it made the bulbs flash twice and then go dead. I went to the kitchen next because that was my brother's main concern. He wanted me to make sure there were no water leaks. The pipes in old buildings tend to burst if they're not maintained. Once I stepped inside the kitchen area, I noticed peeling paint, rusted stoves, and a set of fridges that smelled like rotted plastic. The counters were covered in dust and some scattered debris. I used my flashlight to check under the sinks. The pipes were damp, but there wasn't any major leak at first glance. I wiped my hand along one of the drain lines and felt cold moisture. It wasn't enough to panic about, but I knew we'd need to fix it soon. Then I heard the first thump. It came from somewhere under my feet. It sounded like a dull knock on metal or thick wood. It echoed upward. I felt my chest tighten for a second because I wasn't expecting it. I paused and listened. The thump stopped. I figured it might be a water hammer in the pipe, so I turned on the faucet. The water sputtered out, then ran clean. There were no follow-up noises, so I shrugged it off. I walked back out to the main dining area and checked the corners where the walls met the floor. I was looking for cracks or water spots. That's when I heard the second knock. This time it sounded more deliberate, like someone tapping a slow, steady beat. I froze and listened again. There was a pattern, but I couldn't place it. It was like thump, 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 with equal intervals between each sound. It made my hair stand on end because it didn't resemble any typical building noise. I started toward the door that led to the basement. I turned the knob and stepped onto the top stair. The smell hit me first. It was stale air mixed with mildew. I shone my flashlight down the basement stairs were made of old wood and parts of them were crumbling at the edges. I could see thick cobwebs near the corners. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling above the stairwell, but the light flickered so much that it barely helped. I took one step and the wood creaked, then another step. I moved slowly because I didn't trust the condition of the steps. My flashlight showed me a narrow hallway at the bottom leading to a heavy metal door. I made it downstairs and saw a couple of crates piled up against the walls. They were labeled with old brand names I didn't recognize. There was a slight drip coming from a pipe in the ceiling and it hit a puddle on the floor. The wet concrete gave off a musty odor. I reached the metal door and tried the handle. It was unlocked, so I pulled it open. Inside was the basement storage area where they used to keep meat and dairy products. There were old freezers, large steel shelves, and broken pallets. Scattered around the floor was partly covered in debris. A few overhead lights were installed, but only one or two were even flickering. Most didn't work at all as soon as I stepped in. My flashlight started to dim. I tapped it and the beam got a little stronger. That's when I heard the banging again. It was louder now, and it seemed to come from the far corner near a massive walk-in freezer door. It was the kind of freezer that has a thick latch and used to hold large amounts of food. The rhythmic knocks continued. They had an almost mechanical pace, like someone tapping a metal pipe with a steady beat. I aimed my flashlight toward the freezer door. I didn't see any movement. The door was slightly ajar, but it looked stuck in place. I called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice echoed in the concrete space. I didn't expect an answer, but I felt compelled to say something. The knocking stopped the moment I spoke. Silence filled the basement except for the dripping water behind me. My stomach felt tight and my hands were a little shaky. I approached the freezer, each step careful and slow. The floor was slick in places because of condensation. I reached the freezer door and shined my flashlight inside. It was empty. The shelves inside were rusty and there was a dark stain on the floor that could have been anything, oil, old food residue. I wasn't sure. I stood there waiting. Nothing happened, no sound, no motion. I felt the hair on my arm standing up. My heart was pounding. I walked away from the freezer, scanning the room. I checked behind some large cardboard boxes. They were discolored and warped from years of humidity. I shone my flashlight in every corner. There was no one there. It was just me in the basement, standing near a broken equipment and old storage racks. The lights in the basement flickered a few times, then stabilized. I decided to head back upstairs. As soon as I turned toward the stairs, I heard the knocks again. My pulse jumped. I turned around and aimed my flashlight everywhere. The noise sounded like it was coming from the far wall, but it wasn't consistent. It felt like it was following me or reacting to where I pointed my light. I walked toward the noise and it would shift to another corner. I paused and stayed quiet. Then the knocks came from right behind me. I spun around, shining my light on the floor and up to the ceiling. Nothing was there. I felt a bead of sweat rolling down my temple. I decided to pull out my phone. I wanted to record the sound to show my brother every time I pressed the record button. The knocking stopped. I would stand there, phone in hand, feeling my heart thud in my chest. I would wait 10 or 15 seconds. Nothing. Silence. As soon as I ended the recording, the knock started again. It felt like some kind of sick joke. I tried 2 or 3 times. Each time the sound vanished the moment I tried to capture it. Then as soon as I stopped recording, it came back steady and rhythmic. I felt anxious and annoyed. My legs were tensing up. My breathing got faster. I thought maybe it was the old ventilation system turning on and off, so I walked around and checked for vents. The restaurant had a few ducts, but none were running. The entire place was quiet. No fans, no air conditioning. Nothing. I looked at the walls, checking for any mechanical system that might cause a repeated knock. I found nothing but old pipes. I tapped one of them with my knuckles to see if I could replicate the sound. It produced a dull clang, not the exact rhythmic beat. I'd heard I gave up on that idea and looked around for other explanations. The basement walls were thick. The building was old, so the foundation was made of stone in some places, concrete in others. Water sometimes seeped in. But I didn't see any major leaks here. There were some rusted brackets in a few places where the wall was cracked, but I couldn't find anything that explained the steady knocks. I decided to take a quick walk outside to see if maybe passing trucks or some external force was causing vibrations. I climbed back upstairs, making sure to watch my step in the main dining room. The air felt a bit fresher, but the tension in my shoulders wouldn't go away. I reached the front door, stepped outside, and listened. The street was empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just silence. There was a street lamp about half a block away flickering. That was it. I re-entered the restaurant, locked the door behind me, and flipped on my flashlight again because the overhead lights were still worthless. I hesitated, thinking about going back down there. I didn't really want to, but I couldn't just ignore it. My brother expected me to check everything thoroughly. I sighed and made my way back down to the basement. The air felt heavier this time, like it was clinging to my skin. I noticed a small trickle of water running down one wall near the stairwell. It looked recent. I reached out to touch it. It was cold. The knock returned before I even crossed into the main storage area. It was fainter, more distant. I walked toward the big freezers again. I stood near the largest one and listened. The knocks sounded like they were behind the walls or maybe underneath the concrete floor. It had a pattern of 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more knocks. I tested the phone recording again. Same result the moment I hit. Record it went silent. The second I stopped, it came back. I felt my throat tighten, my heart was pounding harder, my scalp tingled. I wiped sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. I looked around for a fuse box or circuit board. I found an old electrical panel on the basement wall. I opened it hoping maybe the breaker was causing some weird repetitive clicking. The panel was dusty and had cobwebs. I flipped a few switches back and forth, but everything seemed normal. The knocking continued. I could feel it vibrating through the floor. Sometimes the entire situation made my stomach churn. I took a step toward the corner of the room where I noticed an old door that I hadn't opened yet. It was smaller, probably a closet or another storage section. The door was made of wood with a corroded doorknob. I tried turning the knob, but it was stuck. I pulled harder. It gave way with a scrape, like it was jammed from years of disuse behind that door. There was a cramped space with shelves and crates. I aimed my flashlight in and checked every inch. I saw some jars and cans all expired long ago. The ceiling in that area was low and the smell was stale. I didn't hear anything coming from that closet. No knocks, no tapping. It was just an old storage nook. I backed out and let the door close again. The knocking seemed to resonate in the center of the room. Now it was the same pattern of 3 knocks and a pause. I placed my hand on the concrete wall to see if I could feel a vibration. My palm tingled with each knock like the building was carrying the sound. My skin was clammy and I could feel my heart in my ears. I scanned around the floor for any kind of trapdoor or extra hatch, something that might lead to a sub. The restaurant was old enough that it could have hidden spaces. I kicked aside some broken wood and found nothing but cracked concrete. I tried talking out loud again, even though I felt ridiculous. "I know someone's here," I said. My voice echoed. The knocking paused, then it came back. Same pattern over and over. It was calm and steady like a drum beat. Every time it paused, I held my breath waiting for it to stop completely, but it didn't. It kept going even when I was silent when I talked. It sometimes paused for a moment, then resumed my phone. Battery was draining faster than normal, probably because I had the flashlight on. I checked the time, past 11 p.m. I wanted to call my brother, but I knew he'd be asleep or busy. Plus, I wasn't sure what to say to him. "Hey, your cheap restaurant has creepy basement knocks that won't record on my phone." He might think I was messing with him or losing my mind. I considered leaving, but that would mean walking away from the responsibility I promised I'd handle. Also, I wanted to figure out what this was. It felt like if I just ran off, I'd never figure it out. I walked back to the stairs. The knocks followed me. They got softer as I moved away from the storage area, but they didn't stop. I paused near the foot of the stairs. The overhead bulb flickered wildly, and for a second, everything went dark. When it came back on, I could still hear the faint rhythm echoing behind me. I climbed the steps slowly. My knees felt stiff. I pushed open the door to the main floor and closed it. Behind me, the moment the door shut, the knocking went silent. I stood there for a minute, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. I was in the main dining area again. The air still smelled old, but it wasn't as suffocating as the basement. I tapped my flashlight against my thigh, trying to keep my nerves in check. Then I heard a distant thunk from below. It sounded more muffled, but it was still there like a reminder. I made a quick round of the dining area, checking the walls and corners. Everything seemed normal on this floor. The silence made the tension worse because I was still thinking about the knocking below. I thought about calling it a night. I told myself I'd done what I could, but then I remembered I needed to make sure the basement door was secured. I didn't want some squatter or random person sneaking in, so I marched back to the stairwell door and opened it. I flicked the light switch near the door for a second. The basement lights came on bright, then they flickered and went dim. I descended halfway down the stairs. The knocking started again right on cue. It was loud, echoing up the walls. It almost felt like it was inside my head. I raised my phone, tried to record one last time, and it went dead silent. My flashlight flickered. I cursed under my breath. I turned off the recording and the knock started up again. I felt goosebumps on my arms. I stood there listening to the rhythm. My breathing was shallow. The knocks were as steady as ever. I decided I'd had enough for one night. I backed up the stairs and made sure the door was closed firmly. I locked it from the main floor side and tested the handle. It seemed secure. Then I wiped more sweat off my forehead and took a final look around the restaurant. Everything else was quiet. I left through the front door, making sure to lock it behind me. As I walked away from the building, I could almost feel the knocks in my head like they'd followed me outside. The street was calm and the air felt a little cooler. I slid into my car, turned the engine on, and sat there for a moment staring at the dark restaurant facade. My heart was still racing. I felt a dull ache in my shoulders from all the tension. I pulled away and drove home. My mind was spinning. I wasn't sure how to explain what happened or what I'd heard. I didn't have a single recording that proved anything, but I knew something was down there banging on the walls or the pipes in a deliberate way. I wondered if it would happen again the next night. I had a strong feeling it would, and I wasn't looking forward to going back, but I also knew I didn't have much of a choice. My brother was counting on me to keep the place safe, and he was determined to restore it. I just hoped I could figure out what was causing those knocks, or at least figure out a way to make them stop, because I knew I'd be back there soon. Whether I liked it or not, I still remember the first night I saw that old car parked in the far corner of the lot. It was close to midnight and the whole place was silent, except for the low hum of the overhead lights. I was heading to my own car, thinking about nothing special, when I spotted those two men leaning against the driver's side door. They didn't move. They didn't say anything. They just looked straight at me and my heart started to pound. I work in a small industrial complex that has a few workshops and offices all clustered together. Most of the employees leave around 6 or 7 p.m. I usually stay until at least 10 p.m. because I handle some after-hours tasks. That night I clocked out around 11 p.m. The parking lot was empty except for my car and a few trucks belonging to people from another department. Way off to the side, under a broken light fixture, I saw an old sedan that looked like it was from the 1970s. The paint was a dull gray and the shape was boxy with round headlights that seemed too large. The front bumper had a slight dent. The two men stood next to it. One of them had his arms crossed and the other was leaning back on the hood with his hands in his pockets. I stopped for a second because I wasn't sure if they were employees or visitors. Usually I recognize the cars around here. It's a small place. We don't get many random vehicles still. I tried not to stare. I glanced at them, gave a small nod and walked toward my own car when I passed by them. I could feel their eyes on me. I tried to act normal. I was tired and wanted to get home, but I remember that moment so well. The way my skin prickled, the sound of my own breathing, and the soft crunch of gravel under my shoes. The men didn't speak. They stayed still after I got in my car. I looked in my rearview mirror. They were still watching me the next morning. I felt a little uneasy. I thought about mentioning it to someone, but part of me thought I was overreacting. Sometimes we get outside contractors who come in at odd hours. Maybe those guys were waiting for someone or taking a break. I let it go. A few nights later, I stayed even later than usual, around midnight. I headed out to the parking lot again. It was mostly empty. The big overhead lamps cast long shadows across the concrete. It was cold that night and the wind whipped across the lot in bursts. As soon as I opened the door, I spotted that old car again, the same corner, the same broken light. The two men stood next to the open trunk. They were talking quietly when I stepped outside. They stopped talking and turned to look at me. My heart thumped in my chest. I tried to keep my gaze forward like it wasn't a big deal, but my stomach felt tight. The air felt heavier. I moved faster than usual, fished my keys from my pocket and got in my car. I didn't even bother to check my phone. Once I sat down, I just started the engine. When I glanced in the mirror, they had closed the trunk and were standing behind the car. Both looking in my direction, I pulled out and left the lot, checking my rearview mirror. Every few seconds they stayed put that night. I could see their silhouettes for a moment. Then they vanished behind the edge of the building as I turned onto the main road. The weird thing was, no one else seemed to notice. The next day I mentioned it casually to a friend in security. He asked me what the guys looked like. I told him two medium-built men, one with a dark jacket, the other with a baseball cap and an old gray sedan. He shrugged, said he didn't remember seeing anyone matching that description, and he had no record of an old sedan passing through the gate on any official pass. That made my pulse spike. I asked if maybe it was a visitor or a night shift contractor. He just said, "Could be, but we don't usually have that around here at midnight. I'll keep an eye out." Then he waved it off and changed the subject. I felt brushed aside, which annoyed me. By the following week, the pattern became stranger. I saw that car at least 3 nights out of 5, always parked in that same corner under that dim or broken light. The men rarely did anything except talk quietly when I walked toward my car. They would stop talking and watch me. It felt like they were waiting for something, or maybe someone, but I never saw them interact with anybody else. And it wasn't just the silence, it was the way they stared. It felt more intense each time, like they were sizing me up or trying to figure out if I was worth approaching. My mind started to race with questions. Who were they? Why park so far from the main building? And why show up so often? If they weren't employees, one night I decided to leave earlier than usual. I wanted to avoid the strange encounters. I clocked out around 9:00 p.m., stepped into the parking lot and scanned the area. The old sedan wasn't there. I felt relieved and my nerves unclenched a bit. I drove home without incident, kept an eye on the mirror, but everything was normal. No sign of them the next day. I stayed late again just to see if this pattern would continue around 11 p.m. I left my office and walked outside, and there they were, parked at an angle with the nose of the car facing away from the building. Both men were leaning against the passenger side door. The wind was calmer that night, and I could hear them speaking in low voices. I couldn't make out their words when they saw me. They stopped. I gripped my jacket pockets. My breath caught in my throat. My feet felt stiff, like I didn't want to walk past them, but I forced myself to move. I didn't want to act like I was afraid. My heart was thumping so hard that I felt it in my ears as I got closer. One of the men kept his eyes locked on mine. He was bald or had very short hair. I couldn't see clearly under the parking lot. Lamps. The other man wore a cap pulled low. Their facial expressions were neutral, but there was a kind of tension in the air. I nodded and said, "Good evening." In a quiet voice, not expecting a reply. They didn't nod back or say anything. They just stared. I walked faster, opened my car door and got in. My hand shook a little as I turned the key. I didn't waste any time. I drove out. Feeling their gaze on the back of my neck, I decided enough was enough. The next morning, I talked to my friend in security again. I told him this was getting weird, and I didn't feel comfortable walking alone at night. I asked him to check the cameras or drive through the parking lot every hour. He sighed and said that most of the security cameras out there didn't cover that far corner because it was near a storage area that's rarely used at night. He promised to have someone patrol, but I got the sense that he still thought I was blowing this out of proportion. He told me that if those guys weren't doing anything illegal or disturbing, there wasn't much he could do. That night I left around 10:30 p.m. The parking lot was almost empty. The sky was overcast and a light drizzle fell. It gave the concrete a reflective sheen under the lights. I checked the corner. The old sedan was there again, and I felt my chest tighten. This time the two men were inside the car with the headlights off. I only noticed them because the streetlight behind the car made the windows glow faintly. I walked as fast as I could to my car without running. My heart thudded and my mouth felt dry. I unlocked my door and slid behind the wheel, then locked all the doors. I glanced at the sedan. One of the men in the front seat was turned, slightly looking in my direction through the passenger window. It felt like he was waiting to see what I would do. I started the car and left the parking spot, keeping my eyes on the rear-view mirror. The sedan didn't move right away. I turned onto the access road, and for a moment I thought maybe I was safe. Then in the mirror I saw headlights turning onto the same road. A few seconds later my stomach dropped. I couldn't see the shape of the car clearly, but the headlights were spaced wide apart, like older models. Sometimes I tried to stay calm. I kept telling myself it might be a coincidence. Maybe they just headed out at the same time. I drove the speed limit, which is about 40 miles. Acquired beyond that stretch, my nerves spiked whenever I glanced in the mirror and saw those headlights behind me. At one point I switched lanes, and after a few seconds the car behind me switched lanes too. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel and I swallowed hard. I thought about pulling into a gas station, but there weren't any open ones on that road. At that hour I finally reached a more populated area near a set of traffic lights. There were a few convenience stores, a 24-hour diner, and some other late-night spots. As soon as I approached the light, I checked my mirror again. The headlights were gone. I scanned the side streets, but I saw no sign of that old sedan. My shoulders relaxed and my breath came in quick bursts. I rolled down the window to get some fresh air. My heart was still pounding, but at least they weren't following me anymore. I drove the rest of the way home, constantly checking my mirrors, half expecting them to pop up again the next day at work. I told my security friend about what had happened. He nodded slowly this time, looking more concerned than before. He said he'd do a thorough patrol around midnight to see if he could catch them there. He'd also check the ID logs at the gate, but he reminded me that if they weren't entering through the main entrance, maybe they were coming in from some other access point. Our complex has multiple gates and some are less monitored. After a certain time, I asked if we could block those off, and he explained that management wouldn't just seal gates without a strong reason. I felt my frustration rising. I still had to work. I couldn't just quit or change my schedule overnight. I tried to adjust my hours so I wouldn't be alone, but sometimes my workload required me to stay late. I started bringing a small flashlight and keeping my phone in hand whenever I walked to my car. I considered getting pepper spray, but I wasn't sure if that was allowed on company property. My focus at work suffered. I couldn't stop thinking about those guys in their old sedan for about a week. I didn't see the car. The tension in my chest lessened. I started sleeping better. I began to think maybe they found another place to hang out, or maybe security confronted them on a night I wasn't around. But then on a Thursday night, I ended up working until almost midnight again. I remember the date because it was a few days before we had a big shipping deadline. When I stepped outside, the hairs on my arm stood up. The old sedan was back in that dark corner. The trunk was open again, and one man stood near it. The other was leaning against the driver's door, looking at me. I stopped for a second, then took a shaky breath and started walking toward my car. My palms were slick and my pulse hammered in my temples. The man near the trunk closed it with a thud. It echoed across the empty lot. Then both men walked around the car so they were standing near the passenger side facing me. I kept walking, although every part of me wanted to bolt. I fumbled for my keys in my jacket pocket. My fingers felt numb when I was about 15 feet away. One of them said something in a low voice. I heard the sound, but not the words. Then he took a small step toward me. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to keep walking, eyes on my own car. My heart pounded so hard I was sure they could hear it. Nobody else was around. No other cars, no security guard in sight. I couldn't even hear footsteps. It was just me, them, and the distant hum of the overhead lights. I reached my car, opened the door, and jumped in. I started the engine, locked the doors, and looked toward the sedan. Both men stood there staring. One had his hand in his coat pocket. The other had his arms at his sides, fists clenched for a moment. I thought they might walk over, but they stayed still. I pulled out as quickly as I could and tried not to squeal my tires in the rearview mirror. I saw them get into their sedan. My pulse skyrocketed. I exited the lot, my headlights bouncing off the chain-link fence. After a minute, I spotted their headlights behind me. I pressed the gas pedal harder, trying not to break the speed limit. By too much, my mind was racing. I scanned the road. It was dark, only the occasional street light. A few cargo trucks passed by. The sedan stayed behind me. Maybe 5 or 6 car lengths. I tried not to make any sudden turns. I kept telling myself to remain calm, but my mouth was so dry I could barely swallow. I drove onto the main highway where the speed limit jumped to 55. The sedan followed my heart thumped every time I checked the mirror. They never got too close, but they stayed behind me for several miles. I saw an off-ramp for a more crowded commercial area and decided to take it. As I merged onto the ramp, the sedan switched lanes. I expected them to follow me down the exit, but they didn't. They kept going straight on the highway. I watched them pass under a streetlight, and then their taillights disappeared into the distance. I breathed out shakily and realized I'd been gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. My shirt was damp with sweat. I felt like my heart was going to explode out of my chest. I pulled into a brightly lit gas station and parked near the entrance. I waited there, engine running, for a few minutes, looking around for any sign of that old sedan. I didn't see them. Eventually, I drove home, taking side streets and checking my mirrors constantly. The rest of the way I was alone. That was a few days ago. I told security again, and they said they'd talk to management about locking the side gates at night. I still don't know who those guys are. I haven't seen them since that last follow, but every time I leave work late, my stomach twists into knots. I keep imagining that sedan in my mirror, those men under that broken light just staring without a word. I check the lot every time before I step outside. I try to act normal, but every time I see a similar old car on the road, my pulse races. Right now, I'm just trying to go about my routine without letting the fear consume me. I don't know if they'll come back, and I have no idea what they want, but it's the worst feeling I've had in a long time. I never thought I would question my own judgment so intensely. The first time I met Gabriel at our language course, I thought he was just another friendly guy in his early 30s. He had a confident way of speaking, always ready with a quick joke or a helpful suggestion about grammar exercises. We both needed a ride to and from class, so we started carpooling. That was how it all began. My first impression was simple. He seemed polite. He would open the passenger door for me. He would greet me with a firm handshake, and he would drop casual comments about different spiritual ideas. At first, I liked hearing about these topics. We talk about meditation, stress relief, and ways to focus better. Nothing felt strange. Then I remember his car smelled like pine-scented air freshener, and he kept it spotless. He would drive with one hand on the wheel and one hand resting on the window. And he had a steady way of looking straight ahead. His eyes never seemed to wander, which gave him a certain presence. I found reassuring about 2 weeks after we started sharing rides. He invited me to have coffee one evening. We stopped by a small cafe near the language school. He said he wanted to show me a couple of books that had changed his life. I agreed, thinking it would be a casual conversation. We sat in a corner of the cafe, the overhead lights dim, the chairs a little stiff, and the smell of espresso strong. He reached into his backpack and pulled out 2 hardcover books with dark covers. They had strange titles in big letters, talking about mental exercises and rituals. For a new dawn, he opened one and showed me a series of diagrams that looked like patterns of circles and triangles. He said he belonged to a private group that used these practices to achieve a higher level of awareness. I felt a slight chill in my arms because the images in those books were unusual. He flipped through the pages, slowly describing ceremonies in remote locations, chanting in small groups, and focusing on specific tasks for mental clarity. I asked if it was some kind of religion, but he said it wasn't. He called it a discrete path that valued solitude and discipline. I didn't press for too many details at first. I was curious, but I also felt uneasy. The diagrams and the terms sounded foreign to me over the next few days. Every time we drove together, he would talk about those ideas. He never pressured me, but he made them sound intriguing. He said if I wanted to learn more, I could come to a meeting with his group. He added that it wasn't open to everyone, but I seemed like a good candidate because I was level-headed and eager to learn. That made me feel proud for a moment. I thought, why not explore something new? So I accepted his invitation. The first meeting took place at a rundown community center on the outskirts of town. We arrived late at night, about 9 p.m. The building had a weak flickering lamp out front inside. We walked down a hallway with peeling paint and a faint smell of mold. We entered a small room with no windows. 7 or 8 people were sitting in a circle. They were dressed casually, just jeans and sweatshirts or t-shirts. Nothing stood out in that sense, but their expressions were focused. It felt like they all shared a secret. Gabriel introduced me as someone who was interested in the way of mental expansion. No one clapped or said anything enthusiastic. They just nodded and watched me. The meeting started with a short breathing exercise which seemed harmless enough. A woman in her 40s led a countdown telling us to inhale and exhale slowly. Then she began reading from one of those books Gabriel had shown me. She listed steps for cleansing the mind of external influences. The language was direct. She told everyone to cut ties with distractions and push away all that is negative. Then she said we should share our personal experiences one by one. People spoke about times they felt attacked by negativity in their daily lives. They blamed old friends, ex-partners, or co-workers. They insisted that those connections dragged them down. I sat there listening. I didn't say much because I didn't feel like I had anything so dramatic to share afterward. Gabriel drove me home. He looked excited. He said he could see I had the potential to learn more, to reach a higher plane of mental strength. I thought it sounded exaggerated, but I smiled and thanked him for taking me. I went to bed that night with a mix of curiosity and confusion. My mind felt heavy with those concepts of negativity and distractions. A couple of weeks passed and Gabriel kept inviting me to small get-togethers. With members of that group, they showed me more advanced exercises that involved standing for long periods, staring at a single point on a wall and repeating certain words in a low voice. They never used candles or robes or anything dramatic. Everything felt stripped down, focused on repetition and concentration. I admit it gave me a sense of calm. Sometimes my job was stressful and these exercises made my head a bit clearer. That's what pulled me deeper into their activities. The first real sign of trouble came when Gabriel told me quite bluntly that I should start distancing myself from people who didn't understand our methods. He used a firm tone. We were sitting in his car after class. He said, "If you want to progress, you can't let ignorant people hold you back." I felt a pinch in my stomach. My palms got sweaty on my knees. I asked him what he meant by ignorant people, and he said it could be anyone not aligned with our path, including close friends or relatives. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't laugh back. He said he was serious. He kept a steady gaze on me while we sat in the parking lot. The only sound was the hum of the car's engine. Finally, I told him I wasn't comfortable cutting people out of my life. He said I didn't need to do it all at once, but I should start missing social events and stop calling certain friends. He told me it was a necessary sacrifice. I felt my stomach tightening again. I just nodded and said I'd think about it. Over the next few days, Gabriel sent me text messages urging me to skip a coworker's birthday party and spend time studying the group's materials. He said each day I wasted on outside matters was a loss for my spiritual growth. I found myself getting irritated, but I also felt guilty for ignoring him. He had become this constant voice in my head telling me to focus on the group. My nights got restless. I would wake up at 3 a.m., sweaty with my heart pounding. I would remember his words, necessary, sacrifice, negativity, ignorance. I started to feel uneasy at work, glancing at my phone to see if he had sent me another message. I wanted to please him, but something about his insistence felt wrong. Not long after I mentioned to Gabriel that I had some problems at work, we were finishing our language class standing in the hallway. I said my workload was piling up and my boss was pressuring me to meet tight deadlines. Gabriel didn't hesitate. He said, "That's happening because you're still around people who are blocking your energy." He offered no practical advice. He just repeated that if I wanted relief, I should follow the group's ritual that weekend. He gave me a piece of paper with a set of instructions. Wake up at 4 a.m., stand in a quiet room, recite a sequence of phrases, and burn a small piece of paper with a list of names of people who I believed were poisoning my mental space. My face got hot when I read it. My throat felt tight. I told him I wasn't sure if I wanted to do that. He said, "Either you do it or you keep letting them control you." Then he walked away before I could respond. That weekend I did nothing of the sort. I slept in. I went to see a movie on Sunday. I tried to ignore Gabriel's calls on Monday morning. I checked my phone and saw 3 voicemails from him. Each one had the same message: "You're hurting your own progress. You're choosing them over the path. This will have consequences." His voice was calm, but it made the hairs on my arm stand up when he picked me up. For class that afternoon, he didn't smile. He barely spoke. He just parked in front of my place and waited for me to get in during the drive. I apologized for ignoring the ritual. I said I just wasn't ready. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. He said, "Every day you wait, you get deeper in trouble. Don't come crying to me when your life falls apart." I noticed my hands trembling in my lap. I told him he was overreacting and that I was free to make my own decisions. He turned his head and gave me a look of disgust. Then he focused back on the road and stayed silent over time. He escalated his pressure. He started insisting that I quit my job completely. He said if I wanted to be serious about the group's principles, I had to cut off every influence that was infecting my mind. He claimed my coworkers were polluting my thoughts with their negative energy. Whenever something stressful happened at work, like a client complaining or a project going wrong, he used it to prove his point. He'd say, "See, this is a direct result of your refusal to follow the path." I felt trapped because I couldn't argue with him without him twisting everything around. I realized I was getting pulled deeper when my own friends noticed I was more distant. They'd invite me to hang out after work and I'd hesitate. I'd feel this internal conflict. Part of me wanted to go and relax, but another part heard Gabriel's voice scolding me for wasting time. My mood grew dark. I spoke less. My appetite changed. I sometimes felt a tightness in my chest when I tried telling Gabriel that I was concerned about these physical symptoms. He brushed it off and said, "That's just your body resisting the path. Keep going." I started making excuses to avoid seeing him outside the car rides and classes, but we were still in the same language course, so I couldn't escape him easily when he picked me up. The conversation always came back to the group. He'd demand to know if I had tried the rituals yet, or if I had finally started cleaning out my social circle. If I didn't give the right answer, he'd get agitated. Sometimes he would grip the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. He'd run his hand through his hair with a sharp motion and sigh loudly like he was dealing with a stubborn child. Then he would remind me I was not dedicated enough. After a few more weeks, I felt mentally exhausted. My boss noticed I was distracted. My friends asked me if everything was okay. I couldn't explain the situation because I felt embarrassed. I kept hearing Gabriel's voice in my head telling me they wouldn't understand. He'd repeat lines like, "You'll regret sharing our secrets with outsiders." The tension in my body built up, my neck got stiff, and my lower back ached from constant stress. My sleep patterns got worse. I had occasional nightmares, waking up drenched in sweat. My heart pounding one evening, Gabriel asked me to go to a special meeting. He said it was going to be held outside the city at a small cabin in a secluded area. He told me this was a crucial step if I wanted to achieve real progress. I hesitated. He looked at me with a cold stare. He said, "If you don't come, you can forget about the group. You'll be on your own and things won't be easy." I felt cornered. My stomach churned. I told him I needed time to think. He said, "There's nothing to think about. Either you're in or you're out." That night I couldn't sleep. My mind raced, imagining what might happen at that cabin. I pictured a scenario where I couldn't leave or where they might demand something extreme. My heart thumped in my chest and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead by morning. I decided I had to distance myself completely, no matter the consequences at class. The next day I avoided Gabriel. I didn't respond to his messages. I drove myself there after class. He cornered me in the hallway. He gripped my arm and said, "You're making a mistake. Everything you do from now on will be harder and you'll see how this world is against you. Don't come looking for me when it all collapses." His voice was low and calm. I pulled my arm away and told him to back off. My heart was pounding and I felt a slight nausea. I walked out without looking back. Over the following weeks, I limited all contact. I stopped going to the group meetings. I stopped answering his calls. I felt anxious, worried he might show up unannounced. I changed my routine, leaving my home earlier and taking different routes. My sleep was still messed up for a while. Every time my phone buzzed, I felt a jolt in my stomach, expecting his name to appear on the screen. But gradually the calls slowed down. Eventually they stopped. Now when I look back at that period, I remember the tension in my muscles, the constant headaches, and the way my pulse would race every time I thought about him or the group. I can still picture his cold stare, the calm threats, and the logical sounding explanations he gave for everything. My life wasn't perfect before I met him, but I never felt as trapped as I did when I was under his influence. That's my story. I'm still cautious around people who offer quick solutions to complex problems. I'm still jumpy when I see someone reading a strange book of rituals, but I've regained a sense of normalcy. The tension in my chest is gone and I sleep better. Most nights I won't deny that Gabriel had a certain power in his words, but I learned how easily someone can twist logic to push you into a corner. I learned to listen to my instincts when something doesn't feel right. If I hadn't stepped away when I did, I'm not sure where I'd be right now. That's the honest truth of it. Last night I stood outside an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of my neighborhood, gripping my phone and feeling my heart hammer against my chest. It was around 2 o'clock in the morning. I had just left a party a few blocks away. I was a little buzzed, but not drunk. I felt sharp enough to notice every broken window, every graffiti tag, and every small sound that came from that massive, decrepit building. The darkness around it seemed thicker than the rest of the street. There were no lights on inside, but I thought I heard faint voices somewhere above me. I can't explain why I stopped. Maybe curiosity got the best of me. Maybe I just wanted to confirm the rumors I'd heard about people sneaking in at night, whatever. The reason I froze near the entrance trying to listen. I grew up in this neighborhood. I remember when that hospital still operated. It wasn't the best place, but it served people who couldn't afford going anywhere else. Then it shut down. Folks said it went bankrupt and never recovered after that. It stayed empty. Windows were smashed over time. Gates were cut open and everyone warned me not to go near it. They said users and squatters hung around inside. Some of them unpredictable. I never went in. I had no reason to. But standing there last night, the building had this strange pull. The broken windows, the cracked walls, and the darkness inside felt almost alive. I took a few steps closer to the side entrance. The gate was locked with a rusted chain, but the chain looked loose like someone had messed with it. I nudged it and saw it slide a bit. That was when I heard the first sound from the second floor, a short burst of laughter echoing in the empty corridors. I looked up. Everything was dark, but I had that uncomfortable feeling of being watched, like there were eyes in those busted windows. I tried to stay calm, but my throat tightened and I felt my hands getting sweaty. My heart pounded harder because I knew the place had no electricity, so whoever was laughing wasn't using any lights or anything, at least. Not that I could see. I turned my head toward a small gap in one of the boards covering a first-floor window. It was just big enough to peek through. If I got close, I hesitated. My mind told me to get the hell out of there and go home, but my legs wouldn't move. I inched closer, listened for more laughter, and kept my eyes on that gap. Right then I heard footsteps on concrete coming from the second or maybe the third floor. The steps were uneven, like someone pacing back and forth. The sound echoed, making it hard to tell where exactly it was coming from. I bent down to look inside through the gap, but I couldn't see much. Just shadows and some old furniture tossed around. Suddenly a shape flickered past the corridor in my line of sight. It moved fast and smooth with no flashlight or anything else. My heart jumped. I almost backed away, but I forced myself to stay. I pressed my face closer, hoping I might catch another glimpse. I saw a hallway that stretched to the left, piled with debris and broken ceiling panels. There was a door half off its hinges, then I saw that shape again, passing in the opposite direction. It looked like a person wearing dark clothes, but I couldn't see a face. The figure didn't trip or slow down, even though there was no lighting in there. It walked with confidence. Like it knew every inch of that hallway. A chill ran through my body. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I felt kind of exposed. I worried someone inside might notice me or worse, come out to confront me. I stepped back, panting a bit. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. That was enough for me. I decided to turn around and leave, but before I could walk away, I felt like someone was staring at me. I looked up at one of the second-floor windows and thought I saw the faint outline of a head or a shoulder. It didn't move. It was too dark to tell. But my chest tightened and I got this urge to run. I felt sweat forming on my forehead and my stomach twisted. I glanced around the street. It was empty and quiet except for a stray dog sniffing around a trash can. No cars, no people, nothing that could help distract me from that sickening feeling of being watched. I looked back at the window and that shape was gone, but I still felt eyes on me. I tried to control my breathing and remind myself that it was probably just some person exploring, or maybe some homeless person who called the building home, yet I couldn't shake the tension in my gut. I took a few more steps away from the hospital and checked behind me. The gate was still there, the broken windows were still there, but everything looked more menacing. My imagination ran wild. I pictured someone creeping down the stairs to come outside and confront me. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't help it. The tension got too heavy. I finally decided to leave. Stepping onto the sidewalk and walking quickly down the dimly lit street, my ears stayed alert for any sign of someone following me. I heard nothing except my own footsteps when I got home. I locked the door and tried to calm down. I couldn't sleep right away. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette. I kept replaying the laughter I heard. It was either one person or maybe multiple people. I wasn't sure it sounded like a group, but it echoed strangely. I stared at my ceiling for what felt like hours, half expecting to hear knocking on my door or see someone lurking outside my window. Nothing else happened that night, but I felt exhausted by morning. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something crucial. I needed to walk by the hospital again just to see if there were any signs of what I'd heard. Maybe I wanted to confirm it was just a few homeless folks having a late-night gathering, or maybe I was hoping I'd find some logical explanation. The memory of that fleeting shape in the corridor still bothered me. It moved too quickly and too confidently through a dark hallway full of debris that felt wrong around midday. I forced myself to go back. I walked up the same sidewalk, trying to keep my breathing steady. It was broad daylight, so the building didn't look as frightening, but it was still in bad shape. Broken windows, dirty walls, water stains, and a few old signs near the main entrance. I circled around to the side entrance. The chain was still there, loose around the gate. When I poked my head inside, I noticed bits of charred wood on the ground, like someone had lit a small fire. There were also empty bottles scattered around. Some were beer bottles, others looked like cheap whiskey. The smell of burned paper or plastic hung in the air. Maybe they used it as fuel for the fire. Seeing that evidence relaxed me a bit. It made sense. People in rough situations, maybe with addiction problems, probably stayed there at night. They might have had a small party inside that could explain the laughter. I moved closer to the open area near the side entrance, watching where I stepped. The ground was littered with broken glass and twisted metal pieces. I spotted a makeshift bedroll in the corner, a few dirty blankets piled on top of cardboard. Nobody was there at the moment, though it seemed deserted. I considered stepping fully inside just to look around. My nerves flared up again. My hand shook and I got that tense feeling in my gut. The place was silent now. In daylight, there were no voices echoing, no footsteps, no strange silhouettes. Everything was still. I stood at the threshold and took a deep breath. The air inside smelled damp and stale. I saw moldy walls and a hallway that curved around to the left. The paint was peeling and there was graffiti on every surface. Then I remembered how I felt last night, cornered, like someone had singled me out from above. I backed away. I wasn't prepared to go inside alone. I'm not a trained investigator. I'm just a guy who lives nearby. My curiosity was strong, but not strong enough to overpower my caution. I turned around and left the side entrance, walking around the WOW building. I looked at the broken windows on the second floor, trying to identify the one where I thought I saw a face. They all looked pretty much the same. Covered in grime and shattered in random patterns, there was a chain-link fence along the back of the hospital that used to be locked, but it was cut open beyond that fence. I saw more trash. A couple of old chairs and some graffiti that said stuff like "Get Out" or random tags. It seemed like people had been coming here for a long time. I thought about how many nights this place might have been full of strangers, laughing, fighting, doing whatever they do in a spot where no one bothers them. Maybe they all know each other. Maybe they're territorial. The idea made me uneasy. I circled back to the sidewalk and paused near the main entrance. The front doors were boarded up, but someone had pried one board away enough to squeeze through. I stared at that opening. My heartbeat quickened as I remembered the silhouette. The way it moved stayed stuck in my mind like a replay. I couldn't skip it. Moved without fumbling, that was the worst part. No light, no hesitation. Nothing. It glided across that corridor as if it owned the place. I told myself it was probably someone who spent a lot of time there and knew the layout by heart. Still, the sense that something else was going on wouldn't leave me alone. I'd heard rumors that the hospital had been left with some equipment still inside some old x-ray machines and hospital beds. Were too big or expensive to move, thieves might have broken in over the years, but I wondered if there was still something left in there. Maybe that's why people kept coming, besides just having a place to sleep. I thought about possible hidden spots, locked rooms, or leftover medical supplies that someone could sell. My imagination ran in circles. I left the hospital behind and went home, but the tension stayed with me all afternoon. I felt a little jumpy checking my windows. Now and then I wondered if I should tell anyone about what I saw, but I didn't see much. Just a figure in a dark corridor. I heard some laughter, that's all. It wasn't exactly evidence of anything dangerous. It could have been a small group of people partying. If I called the police, they'd probably tell me to stay away and mind my own business. I kept revisiting that moment when I felt sure someone was watching me from the window. I can't prove it, I just felt it. My instincts were screaming at me to run. I don't ignore that feeling easily. The next day I went to work and tried to concentrate on my tasks during my lunch break. I told a coworker about the hospital. I kept it brief, just explaining that I passed by, heard voices, and saw signs of people. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, man, that place is a hotspot for squatters." Then he laughed a little and told me I was lucky no one jumped me for my wallet. He didn't seem to take it seriously that night. I lay awake thinking about going back, but not alone. Part of me wanted to see more. Another part wanted to forget the whole thing and move on. The next morning, I forced myself to swing by again just for a quick look during daylight. I found the same burnt area, the same empty bottles, and no people around. The blankets were gone, though, which meant someone had moved them or taken them. Everything else was exactly how it was. The chain on the gate was still loose. The boards on the windows were still pried open. That place wasn't going anywhere. I told myself I'd forget it, but I can't deny the itch in my brain. Something about the way that person moved inside the hospital felt off. My gut told me it wasn't just homeless people or casual trespassers, but I have no proof, and I'm not about to risk my safety for a hunch. I know myself well enough to avoid dumb decisions. I'm not going inside there at night without backup. For now, I'll let it be. That building has its own secrets, and I'm not sure I want to discover them alone when I pass by the hospital. Now I keep my distance. I don't stare up at the windows. I don't listen for sounds, but I can't unhear that laughter echoing down the empty hallways. I can't unsee that silhouette moving without a flashlight. In a place that should be pitch dark, people say it's just squatters. I've seen signs of them myself still. I feel like something else is there, and it's the kind of thing I don't want to provoke. Maybe I'm just paranoid, or maybe my instincts are right. Either way, I'm staying away. After sundown, that tension in my chest hasn't faded, and I don't think it will until the day they finally tear that place down or seal it shut for good. Until then, I'll leave it alone. That's all I can do. I noticed something was off the moment I came back from lunch. My coworker's desk was empty, but his coffee mug was still there. The computer screen showed a half-finished email. His blazer hung on the back of his chair. At first, I assumed he had stepped out to run an errand or make a quick call, but as the hours passed, I started to feel uneasy. By 5, I realized he was gone and no one seemed to care. I work in a small company on the 7th floor of an old office building. The walls are yellowed and the lights in the hallway flicker whenever someone in the adjacent suite uses a microwave or a copy machine. We occupy the entire floor. There are maybe 10 of us, plus our boss, who keeps an office in the corner. He's always behind a closed door. His name is Matthew Johnson, but we just call him Mr. Johnson that Tuesday. I returned from lunch around 1:30 p.m. I remember the time because I glanced at the small digital clock on my desk. My coworker, let's call him Mark, usually left for lunch around noon and came back by 1 row when he didn't show up by 2. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed, but people had their heads down. I got up to stretch, walked past the conference room, and checked the break room. No sign of him. I shrugged and went back to work, figuring maybe he had an appointment or some personal errand by 3 hour. I felt a small knot in my stomach. Mark never left his coffee mug on his desk if he planned to be gone all day. He was the type who rinsed it out immediately after every use. The mug still had a bit of coffee inside. It looked cold and thick. His blazer was draped neatly over the back of his chair as if he had planned to return in a few minutes. I tapped my pen on my desk and thought about asking the boss, but I decided to wait until the end of the day. I kept expecting Mark to walk through the door with some story about the elevator breaking down or a last-minute errand. The clock reached 4 by then, 4:30, then 5G at 5:15. I couldn't stand it anymore. I knocked on Mr. Johnson's door. He opened it part-way and leaned out. He didn't look happy. "Sir, have you seen Mark?" I asked, keeping my voice low so I wouldn't disturb the others. Mr. Johnson stared at me like I'd said something rude. "He's out," he answered. "Focus on your tasks." I felt a small rush of annoyance. "It's just that he's been gone all afternoon," I said. He squinted at me. "It's not your concern. Finish your reports." He shut the door. I stood there for a moment, feeling a flush on my neck. I went back to my desk. The office was quiet now. A few people were packing up, but some stayed later than usual. That's how it often goes here. We don't have a strict schedule and deadlines force us to stay by sixth gear. Most people had left. I had a stack of reports to complete. The overhead fluorescent buzzed and the air conditioner rattled. Mark's desk was next to mine and I couldn't stop looking at it. His email was still open on the screen. It read something about a client order, but the sentence was unfinished. I shut off my computer around 7:30 and decided to check one more time. If Mark had come back maybe through a different entrance. The office was empty. Everyone else had gone home. I walked around the perimeter of our floor, the conference room. Lights were off. The break room was dark. I noticed Mark's Tupperware container in the mini fridge with his name written on a piece of tape. It was still there, unopened. His desk lamp was off, but his coffee mug was in the same place. I felt a chill. I told myself that he must have had an emergency. Still, there was a weird vibe in the air. I returned to my desk and flipped through my phone contacts, thinking maybe we had a company list that included Mark's number. I couldn't find anything. The only contact information I had was the general office phone. I glanced at the employee directory on the company internet. His name wasn't there, which confused me. I was sure I had seen his profile before when we first started working side by side a few months ago. Maybe it was some glitch in the system. I stood up and felt a strange urge to leave. I gathered my papers, but I remembered I still had a set of reports to finalize. Mr. Johnson had asked for them by the next morning. I sighed and sat down again. The building was silent except for the creaking of the old ventilation system around 8D. I heard something in the hallway. It was a soft scraping sound like shoes on the carpet. I froze listening when it stopped. I got up and walked toward the main corridor. The overhead lights there were on a timer, so they were dimmed. Casting the hallway in a pale glow, I saw no one. I walked back to the office area, but my footsteps echoed. I felt a bit self-conscious, like I was being watched when I came back to my desk. I stopped cold. Mark's desk was completely clean. The mug was gone, the blazer was gone, the computer was shut down. There was no sign he'd ever been there. My heart pounded. I scanned the room to see if someone else was around. The place was empty. I ran my hand across the surface of Mark's desk. It was dust-free, like it had just been wiped. I checked the drawers. They were empty. I opened the top drawer. Nothing. I opened the filing cabinet next to his desk. It was locked. I felt a tingling sensation on the back of my neck, like the air was colder. I decided I needed answers. I walked straight to Mr. Johnson's office, but the door was locked. The lights were off inside. I stood in the hallway for a moment, trying to decide if I should call security. Then I remembered that our office rarely deals with building security. We have a code for the front door downstairs, and the building security is minimal after hours. Usually there's just one guard in the lobby and he's half asleep. I hurried toward the elevator, and while I waited for the doors to open, I felt a strong urge to look behind me. I turned around. The corridor was empty, but I noticed a flickering light near the supply closet. It made the hallway look darker than usual. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the lobby. The ride down was slow. The elevator always smells like old carpet and stale air. My stomach was tight in the lobby. I saw the guard behind his desk. He was an older man wearing a rumpled uniform. I approached him feeling a bit awkward. "Excuse me," I said. "Have you seen a guy about my height, brown hair, wearing a blue blazer come through here in the last few hours?" He frowned and looked at his sign-in sheet. "Nobody's come or gone for a while," he answered. "I would have noticed." I nodded and tried to hide my unease. "Thanks," I said. I walked out to the street. It was dark outside and the streetlights buzzed. I stood on the sidewalk feeling the cool air. Part of me wanted to go home, forget everything and hope Mark showed up the next day, but something told me that if I left now, I'd never get an explanation. I went back inside, rode the elevator up and stepped onto my floor again. It was quieter than before. I turned on every light switch I could find, making the hallway bright. I walked into the main office area. My desk was just as I left it, but Mark's was still empty, like it belonged to no one. I decided to check the company's employee records. We keep a few paper files in a locked cabinet near Mr. Johnson's office, but I have a spare key because I handle some of the HR duties. From time to time, I unlocked the cabinet and sifted through the folders. I found mine, the other employees, and some older files. Mark's name was not in there. I checked again, carefully reading the labels. Nothing. It made no sense. I pulled out my phone and tried to remember if Mark had ever emailed me from a personal address or if I had any text from him. Nothing came up. My head felt cloudy and my chest felt tight. I stood up and felt like I was moving through some strange dream, but everything looked normal, just empty. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 9:30. The building would lock down soon and the lights in the hallway might shut off. I decided to gather my stuff and leave as I moved back to my desk to get my backpack. I heard footsteps behind me again. They were soft, like someone wearing sneakers. I spun around. No one was there. My throat went dry. I said, "Hello." Quietly, no answer. I walked across the room and checked every cubicle. They were all empty. I stopped at Mark's desk. I leaned in close to the computer monitor, but it was off. The power cord was disconnected. There was no sign that anything had been on his desk at all. I felt a cool draft from somewhere. The air conditioning was supposed to shut off after, but I heard it humming faintly. My arms felt prickly and I realized I was sweating. Even though the air was cold, my eyes darted around and I had the sensation that someone stood right behind me when I turned. Nothing was there. I couldn't handle the tension anymore. I grabbed my things and headed for the elevator. This time I kept looking over my shoulder. The corridor felt longer than usual and the flickering light near the supply closet made me nervous. The elevator arrived with a ding and I jumped inside, pressing the lobby button quickly. The doors closed and I exhaled. I drove home feeling numb. I hardly slept that night. I kept seeing Mark's desk in my mind first, with his mug and blazer, then suddenly empty. I dreamed about footsteps in the hallway and the locked cabinet of employee files. The next morning I returned to work at Nino feeling anxious. The office looked normal. People were at their desks. The break room smelled like fresh coffee. I set my stuff down and scanned the room for Mark. Of course he wasn't there. His desk was exactly as it had been when I left, completely empty. I walked toward it. But before I reached it, Mr. Johnson came out of his office and intercepted, and he stopped me with a look. "I need you to focus on the Peterson account," he said. His tone was calm but firm. "You're behind on your tasks, sir." I began about Mark. Mr. Johnson shook his head. "Once drop it." I stared at him. He waited a moment, then walked away. I felt a surge of confusion. How could he not address the situation? Mark's absence was obvious. I thought about asking the other co-workers, but they all had their heads down. Typing or making calls, they didn't seem to notice anything wrong. I sat at my desk and tried to concentrate on the Peterson account, but my hands were shaking around lunchtime. I opened a chat window with a colleague named Dave. I typed, "Hey, do you know what happened to Mark?" Dave's response came back, "Who's Mark?" I blinked and reread his message. That made no sense. "We all used to talk to Mark. He sat right next to me for months." I typed a reply, "Our coworker." He usually sits next to me. Dave wrote back, "I have no idea who you're talking about." I felt a knot in my stomach. I tried messaging another coworker named Sandra. Her reply was similar. I don't know. A mark, my palms got sweaty. I walked over to Dave's desk and asked him face to face. He looked puzzled, as if I was making some kind of joke. Sandra gave me the same reaction. I decided to check the HR system again. I logged in with my credentials and searched for Mark's name. Nothing appeared. I tried searching for any new employees who might have started around the same time. No luck. It was as if he never existed that afternoon. Mr. Johnson approached my desk. He dropped a file folder onto it and said, "I need these done by the end of the day." He looked at me without blinking. I opened my mouth to speak, but he cut me off. "Focus on your work," he said in a low voice. He tapped the folder. "You understand me?" I nodded. He walked away. My heart pounded. I felt trapped. I finished my work mechanically, avoiding conversation with anyone else. By 6G, people started leaving again. I heard them chatting about dinner plans and commutes. I stayed behind, hoping to find some trace of Mark's existence. I searched through old emails, scanned archived files, and checked the desk drawers again. Nothing, not a single mention of him. It was as if he had vanished from every record in the company. The only place he still existed was in my memory, and maybe not even there if I kept doubting myself by 7. Hawk, I heard footsteps again in the hallway. This time I felt too scared to check. I stayed at my desk, pretending to work. The footsteps moved closer, then stopped. The hair on my arm stood up. My breathing got shallow. I spun around in my chair and the corridor was empty. I grabbed my jacket and left. Now I'm sitting at home telling you this story. There's a heavy feeling in my chest. I keep thinking I'll wake up tomorrow and find out it was all some misunderstanding, but I know what I saw. My coworker was real. He had a voice, a face at desk right beside mine. Now he's gone and no one will even acknowledge he existed. My boss refuses to discuss it. The rest of the office claims they don't know him. I check the records and his name is missing. I feel watched even here in my own apartment. The back of my neck prickles like someone is standing behind me. I hear the faintest sound of footsteps in my hallway. At odd hours when I look through the peephole, the corridor is empty every time I go back to that office. I see Mark's empty space and I feel like something is hovering nearby, staring at me, waiting for me to ask one more question. But Mr. Johnson told me to forget my coworkers, pretend they never met Mark. The building feels colder at night. I can't stop glancing at corners and doorways. I'm afraid that whatever happened to Mark could happen to me if I keep pushing. Yet I need to figure out why everyone acts like he never existed. I don't know what's worse. Believing he vanished into thin air or suspecting that this place took him somehow. Tomorrow is Wednesday. I have to go back. I'm dreading the moment I sit down and see that empty desk next to mine. It's just a desk now, no coffee mug, no blazer, no personal items at all. There's only a hollow feeling in the air around it. I keep thinking I'll hear Mark's voice down the hall. I keep expecting him to send me a message telling me it was all a mistake, but there's only silence and the footsteps that come and go when nobody's watching. I don't have an explanation. I only have this uneasy sense that something is deeply wrong in that office, and everyone around me wants to pretend everything is fine. I can't pretend Mark was there. Now he's gone and I'm the only one who remembers. I jolted awake at midnight because of a sudden drilling noise. It wasn't the faint hum of someone hanging a picture. It was loud, repetitive, and it felt strange. My room was dark except for a streetlight glow through the curtains. My heart thumped in my chest and I wondered who on earth would start a home project at that hour. I rubbed my eyes and looked at the clock, 12:07 a.m. The sound came from the house next door where that quiet neighbor lived. I'd seen him around a few times, always alone. Always polite, but never really engaged in conversation. I got up and walked to my window. I peeked through the gap in the curtain, trying not to move it too much. His house was silent from the outside, but I heard a muffled buzzing sound. Then it stopped. I held my breath, waiting for it to start again. After a few seconds, there it was drilling or hammering some kind of heavy tool. It went on for 10 seconds, then another pause. My arms felt tense and I realized I was gripping the windowsill too hard. I decided not to get too worked up about it. Maybe he was fixing a burst pipe or dealing with some kind of emergency. Still, it felt odd. I closed the curtain and headed back to bed. Trying to ignore the rhythm, I stuffed a pillow over my head to block out the noise. Eventually, I must have drifted off, but my sleep was restless. The next morning, I woke up groggy. My mind was stuck on that noise. I made coffee, sat down in the kitchen, and looked through the window. The neighbor's car was gone. He usually left early, so I decided to ask him about it when I saw him next. The day went on. I tried to focus on my job, which I do from home. I typed up some reports, took phone calls, all the usual stuff. But I kept glancing toward his driveway through my office window every time I heard a slight sound. Outside, my stomach tightened. Late afternoon, I heard the rumble of his car returning. I waited a few minutes, then walked out pretending to check my mailbox. I'm not proud of that approach, but I didn't know another way to casually bring it up. He saw me and gave a small nod. I walked over and said hello. He smiled politely, though it seemed like he was in a rush. I said, "Hey, I heard some noise last night. Sounded like you were drilling something." He shrugged and said, "Yeah, I'm just working on a few things in the basement. I had a project that ran later than I planned." He didn't offer much detail. He didn't look nervous, but he also didn't seem interested in prolonging the conversation. He just said, "Sorry if it kept you up." Then flashed a quick smile before unlocking his front door. I stayed there for a moment, feeling a slight chill. His explanation sounded normal, but the entire interaction felt off. I walked back to my place, trying to dismiss the uneasy feeling in my gut. That night, I sat in front of the TV with the volume turned low. I wasn't actually paying attention to the show. I was waiting to see if the noise returned. It did right around midnight again, the same kind of drilling or hammering. My heart rate went up. When I recognized the pattern, I turned off the TV to listen. More carefully, the noise stopped after a few minutes. Then, after a brief silence, it came back. I felt my palms sweating. I debated calling the police, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. It was just a weird time for a renovation. Right, I tiptoed to my back window, the one that looked down toward his basement area. His curtains were closed on the first floor, but I noticed a strong light coming from his basement window. It flickered like a single powerful lamp was being moved around. The strange part was that I thought I heard something else through the faint hum of the tool. It sounded like a muffled voice, or maybe someone groaning. I couldn't make it out clearly, but the hairs on my arm stood up. I felt a lump in my throat. I stayed still, listening. My pulse pounded in my ears. After about a minute, the drilling stopped again, and I heard a low, quick thump, like something falling or maybe someone hitting a wall. It sent a jolt through my body. I backed away from the window. My hands were shaking a little. I grabbed my phone and thought about calling the authorities. Then I talked myself out of it. I told myself I might be overreacting. I reasoned that if there was a real emergency, I'd hear screams, real cries for help. I tried to calm down, reminding myself he was just a quiet neighbor doing some weird late-night project. But that explanation didn't sit well with me. I had trouble sleeping again in the morning. I felt groggy and unsettled. I forced myself to go for a short walk around the neighborhood. It's a calm street, lots of retired folks, a few families, and everything usually feels friendly that day. Though I felt on edge when I passed my neighbor's house, I glanced at the windows. Nothing seemed out of place. There were no visible signs of remodeling, no materials stacked up outside. It was like nothing was happening at all. Around midday, I bumped into another neighbor, Jim, who was watering his lawn. We made small talk about the weather, the local sports team, and how the street had been quiet lately. I almost told him about the late-night noises, but something stopped me. I figured I'd sound paranoid. Plus, Jim is the type who would spread the story around, and I didn't want rumors floating about, so I just nodded and moved on. That evening, my neighbor came home late again. I couldn't see his face well because it was already dark, but I noticed he looked over at my house for a second. I was at my window, and when he glanced up, I stepped back so he wouldn't see me. I felt a spike of adrenaline. My mouth went dry. I decided that I'd stay up that night and see if the noise happened again. Sure enough, around midnight I heard it. It was quieter this time, but still the same pattern. Drill for a bit, pause, some hammering sounds. Another pause, and underneath that I thought I heard those small cries again. I crept to the back window with the lights off in my own house. I peered through a gap in the curtain. The basement light was on, bright and flickering. I stared, trying to detect movement, but the angle made it hard to see anything. Then I heard a clearer moan like someone was in pain or fear. My heart hammered in my chest so hard I could feel it in my throat. I swallowed, stepped back and looked at my phone. My hand hovered over the dial pad. I felt torn on one hand. I didn't want to be the crazy neighbor calling the police because of some weird noise. On the other hand, I had that gut feeling that something was really wrong over there. I decided to wait a bit longer and see if it got worse. I stood by the window listening for about 10 minutes. The drilling stopped, completely replaced by soft thuds and a scraping sound. I couldn't figure out what he was doing. Then total silence. It stayed quiet, so I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the sounds in my head. My stomach hurt from the tension, and I broke into a light sweat every time I pictured someone trapped in that basement the next morning. I woke up after only a few hours of broken sleep. I checked my phone messages, emails, and tried to get some work done. My mind wasn't focused at all. I was anxious and irritated. Around mid-afternoon, I saw the neighbor arrive home earlier than usual. I decided to ask again more directly. I walked out to the front yard, pretending to adjust the trash bins. He gave me a nod as he got out of his car. I said, "Hey, about that noise last night, everything okay over there?" He paused and looked at me, one hand still on his car door. "Yes," he said, a bit curt this time. Then he added, "It's just a personal project. I'm sorry if it bothers you. I'll try to keep it down." There was something in his tone that felt defensive. I nodded, felt my cheeks flush, and said, "No worries. I was just concerned sounded like someone might be hurt." His expression hardened for a split second. Then he forced a small laugh. "No, nobody's hurt. It's just me down there. I'm perfectly fine," he said. He stepped inside and closed the door. As I stood there, I noticed that his blinds were drawn in all the windows. No sign of any construction. No noise in the daytime. Nothing. My nerves were shot that night. I was determined to get more concrete evidence. If I heard the noises again, I decided I'd take a short walk around to the side of his house to see if I could spot anything through the basement window. It was risky, but I felt compelled to understand what was going on. Midnight came. I turned off every light in my house and waited in the dark. My heart pounded. I felt jumpy, like I had too much caffeine. Then the drilling started again, louder. This time I put on dark clothes, stepped out my back door, and crept along the fence that separated our yards. My legs felt shaky and my breath was shallow when I reached the corner of his yard. I crouched down. I tried to move slowly so the grass wouldn't rustle. The basement window was partially visible from where I stood. I could see a bright light shining from inside. The drilling sound felt more intense that close. Then I heard a grunt followed by a wheezing kind of moan. I froze. My mouth went dry. I inched closer, keeping low. Through a thin gap in the curtains, I caught a glimpse of a figure. It looked like my neighbor standing over a metal table. I saw him holding something. It looked like a power drill. Then I saw movement on the table. It seemed like another person was on that table, restrained or stuck. Somehow I felt sick to my stomach. My limbs felt cold and my breathing turned shallow. I realized I was shaking. My mind raced. I thought there's someone else in there and they're in pain. The drilling stopped and I heard muffled sounds that could have been crying or groaning. I couldn't see clearly enough to be sure, but my instincts told me it wasn't normal. I backed away, worried he might look toward the window and see me. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would give me away. I made it back to my back door, fumbled with the knob, and slipped inside. I locked it and leaned against it, heart racing. I grabbed my phone and called the police when the dispatcher answered. My voice shook. I explained that I'd heard disturbing noises and thought someone might be in danger. The dispatcher said they'd send someone to check. I felt both relieved and terrified. I stood there by the window, waiting, eyes scanning my neighbor's property for any sign of movement. Maybe 10 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up. Two officers got out and walked to his door. I watched as he answered. They talked for a couple of minutes, then he stepped aside and let them in. I couldn't see what happened inside, but after a short time, the officers came back out and talked to him on the porch. He kept calm, gesturing a bit, and they seemed to accept whatever he was saying. Then they left. I couldn't believe it. I watched him stand there for a moment, looking around. He stared in my direction. I ducked behind the curtain, heart hammering again. I expected the officers to come knock on my door, but they didn't. They just drove away. I felt a surge of anger and confusion. How had he explained those noises? Did he hide the person I thought I saw was? Losing my mind the next day was worse. I went outside to grab my mail in the afternoon, and there he was, standing by his car, staring right at me. My pulse jumped. He nodded once slowly and said, "Hope you're sleeping better." I forced a tight smile, unsure of how to respond. Then he gave a strange grin and got in his car as he drove off. I felt my stomach churn. He knew I called the police. I was sure of it that night. I barely slept. I was on edge, listening for any sound. A little after midnight, the drilling started again, quieter but still distinct. It didn't last as long this time. There was another series of soft thuds. The light from his basement flickered for a while, then went out. My phone was in my hand the entire time, but I couldn't bring myself to call the cops again. I was worried they wouldn't believe me a second time. I worried about what my neighbor might do if he realized I was the one calling. Days passed and the pattern continued. Some nights there was noise, some nights total silence. Each time I felt that dread in my chest, the tension in my shoulders, the cold sweat on the back of my neck. I thought about talking to other neighbors, but I wasn't sure who to trust. I thought about confronting him directly, but the idea terrified me. I couldn't shake the image of someone strapped to that table. I didn't see any evidence of it during the day, though. He was careful to keep up the appearance of normally no big trash bags, no heavy deliveries, nothing suspicious on the surface. I felt trapped every night. I'd tense up waiting for EU. The drilling to start my productivity at work plummeted, and my friends said I looked pale and jumpy. I gave them vague excuses about not sleeping well. I tried to go out more, spend time away from him in the house, but I always felt drawn back, like I needed to keep an eye on his place. It was unsettling, and I didn't know how to break out of the cycle. As the nights went on, the noises continued. I couldn't stop picturing that basement window. Even when I wasn't looking, I felt like it was glowing in my mind. I remembered those moans, those half-heard cries. Sometimes I'd stand in my own basement and imagine I was trapped next door. The claustrophobic feeling made me gasp for air. I'd have to go back upstairs to calm down. I still haven't gotten any concrete answers. The police came that one time, but they accepted his explanation. I'm too afraid to push it further. He walks around the neighborhood like he's completely ordinary, and everyone else seems to think he's just a quiet man, but I hear the drilling. I see the flickering light. I sense that something is very wrong in that house. I wish I had a satisfying ending to this story. I'm stuck in limbo, waiting for something to change, hoping I'm wrong about what I think I saw. But every time I hear those noises, my body goes rigid and I can't shake the feeling that there is a person in that basement who needs help. I have no proof. All I have are those midnight sounds and that single glimpse of a figure on a table. I'm telling you this because I need to get it off my chest. It's the reality I'm living right now. I feel powerless and anxious, locked in my own home. Listening, if it happens again tonight, I might call the authorities again no matter what. I can't let this continue if someone is truly in danger. But until then, all I can do is sit here, watch the clock, and dread the moment that drilling sound starts once more. I almost turned back when I noticed how fast the sun was dropping. I was near the top of the trail looking out at the city below, and I realized I had lost track of time. The sky was already taking on that dark blue shade that comes right before real night settles in. I knew I should have started heading down an hour earlier, but I wanted one more look at the view. I didn't want to miss that last bit of sunset light. Now I was kicking myself for not paying attention to the time I decided to head back down the trail. Right away, I wasn't scared at first. I'd hiked this route dozens of times, but I usually planned it better, starting early in the morning and finishing before dusk. This time, I was stuck in the middle of a thick forested area as the light dimmed. The trail ahead looked a lot different in the low light, with shadows stretching across the path, and the trees swaying in the evening breeze. The sound of insects grew louder, and I could feel the cool air against my arms and neck. I took out my flashlight and turned it on. The beam lit a narrow slice of the dirt path. I told myself I just needed to move carefully, maybe get home a bit later than usual, but it was no big deal. My phone had no signal up here, which was typical, so I couldn't call anyone to let them know I was running late. Still, I stayed calm. I walked quickly, listening to the crunch of gravel under my hiking boots. After maybe 10 minutes, I noticed something odd up ahead, maybe 200 or 300 yards. There was a flicker of light. It wasn't steady like a typical headlamp or flashlight. It blinked on and off in these strange intervals. It looked like a flashlight being covered and uncovered by someone's hand. I stopped and listened, but I heard nothing. Except the wind through the branches and my own breathing. I didn't see other hikers during the day, and I wasn't expecting to see anyone. Now most people would have already left the mountain. I kept walking, but slower. My pulse started to pick up. I began to feel that uneasy twist in my stomach. My mind jumped around trying to figure out what that light could be. A lost hiker, a group messing around, or maybe someone looking for an animal. The possibilities raced through my head, but none of them felt right. The blinking was too deliberate, like a signal or a code. I tried calling out, "Hello, anyone there?" My voice echoed no response. I moved forward a few steps, shining my flashlight into the trees. Suddenly, those lights ahead snapped off. Total darkness in that direction. I froze. I waited. I listened. At first it was quiet, then I heard a snap of a branch followed by steps rushing away. It sounded like more than one set of footsteps, but I couldn't be sure. My heart started hammering against my chest. I swallowed, feeling my throat go dry. I called out again, "Hey, do you need help?" But the only answer I got was distant rustling. Eventually the forest went quiet again. I felt sweat gathering at my hairline and the humid air clung to my shirt. I decided I wasn't going to turn around and find another route. The main trail down was still the fastest and safest way to reach the base, and I didn't want to get stuck wandering in unfamiliar off-trail areas at night. So I kept walking, but I flicked my flashlight off for a few seconds. I wanted to see if the other lights would come back on, if my own light was off. My eyes adjusted a bit to the darkness. I stood there breathing quietly, scanning the distance. The moon was rising, but it wasn't bright enough yet to light the path clearly. Then in the corner of my eye, I caught another flash. This time it was off to the left, deeper in the woods. Another flicker, then darkness. No voices called back, no sign of a normal conversation or campsite. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I turned my flashlight on again, deciding it was better to see where I was going. I quickened my pace, trying to put distance between me and those lights. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling like someone might jump out from behind a tree. I thought about all the stories people told about weird encounters in the mountains, but I'd never had a single strange moment here until now. Normally, I felt safe on these trails, even alone. This time, the air felt suffocating and every noise made me jump. After another stretch of trail, I came around a bend where the path dipped down into a narrow ravine. Thick brush lined both sides, and the trail itself twisted around large boulders. I shone my flashlight around, trying to see if anyone was hiding behind them. I heard a snap behind me. I whipped around, nothing. Just darkness. I could taste my own fear on my tongue like metal. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would give me away if someone was truly sneaking around. I kept moving. Sweat trickled down my temples and my legs felt tense. I tried to breathe slowly to keep my nerves under control. The trail eventually rose again, leading to a small lookout with a wooden bench. I remembered that bench. Well, it was where I often stopped for a quick water break during the day. Now it looked eerie under the moonlight. The bench's wood was weathered and cracked, and the nearby trees formed tall, looming shapes. I paused at the bench, trying to decide if I should rest or push forward. Suddenly, from behind one of the trees, I saw a silhouette dart out of sight. It was fast, a quick movement. My breath caught in my throat. I tried shining my flashlight there, but I couldn't catch any detail. All I saw was the shape of a person maybe wearing dark clothing. Then they were gone. I whispered a shaky greeting. I don't mean any trouble, but there was no reply. I could hear my heartbeat drumming in my ears. I wiped my forehead, which was covered in sweat. My chest tightened. I looked around and saw nothing else. I had to keep going. Standing there was making me paranoid. I took a long drink from my water bottle, then started moving again. Stepping carefully to avoid tripping on rocks in my rush, I kept hearing faint shuffling in the trees on either side of the trail. Every time I turned to look, I saw only swaying branches, but I knew someone or several people were out there. The lights had been real, the footsteps had been real, the silhouettes were real. I tried calling out a few more times, hoping it was just a group of pranksters or other hikers, but no one answered. I only heard hushes or muffled sounds like they were deliberately keeping their voices low. I turned corners on the trail as fast as I dared. Feeling my calf muscles burn from the steep incline, my flashlight beam bounced across tree trunks and bushes. Occasionally I caught a glimpse of movement, but never for long. Sometimes I heard faint whispers that I couldn't make out, as if more than one person was discussing something in hushed tones. Eventually I reached the lower section of the trail where the path widens and the terrain becomes less rocky. I could smell wet earth and hear the distant sound of a small stream that was a familiar marker that I was maybe 15 or 20 minutes from the trailhead parking area. Relief washed over me, but my guard stayed up. If someone had been following me, I figured they would back off. Now this area was more open, and soon I'd be near the main lot, but as I passed a bend near the stream, I noticed something in the darkness, footprints in the muddy ground. They looked fresh, maybe a few different pairs heading down the trail in the same direction as I was going. It made sense, but it confirmed there were multiple people. My breathing quickened again, and I picked up the pace when I finally saw the small wooden sign that marked the trailhead. I felt a surge of relief. The parking area was just beyond that sign, about 100 yards away. A single lamp stood near the parking lot, giving off a weak yellowish glow. My car was the only one left. I spotted it right away. A silver sedan parked under that flickering light. But as I got closer, something was off. The driver's door was slightly ajar. At first I thought I might be seeing it wrong in the poor light. I walked closer and realized with a jolt of fear that it was definitely open a few inches. I froze in mid-step. Every hair on my arm standing up, my mouth went dry again. I whispered to myself, "What the hell?" I hadn't left the door open. I always locked my car when I parked here. There was no chance I just forgot. I stood there, maybe 20 feet away, shining my flashlight on the car's door. The lock wasn't broken, but the door was unlocked. I didn't see anyone inside. I wanted to run to the driver's seat, start the engine, and get out of there. But fear pinned me in place. My mind spun with the possibilities. Who opened the door? Did they steal anything? Why was it left partially open instead of closed or left wide open? I approached slowly, one step at a time. My palms were sweaty. I gripped my flashlight so tight that my knuckles ached. When I reached the car, I gently nudged the door open with the toe of my boot. Shining my flashlight inside, the seats looked the same as before. Nothing seemed missing. My phone charger was still in the center console. My backpack was on the back seat. Even the coins in the cup holder were there. The only difference was that the glove compartment was open and the papers inside it were scattered across the passenger seat. My stomach churned. Someone had searched through my car, but why nothing valuable was gone? At least from what I could see. I looked around the parking lot, but it was empty. I listened for footsteps or voices, but it was quiet, except for the distant chirp of insects. I felt vulnerable standing there. My brain raced. They could be watching me, waiting for a chance to scare me again or do something worse. I slammed the car door shut, threw my backpack inside, and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were shaking, and I struggled to get the key into the ignition. I finally got the engine started and locked the doors. My headlights lit up part of the lot, showing a row of bushes and the start of the trail. I didn't see anyone, but I swear I felt eyes on me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. I put the car in reverse, checking all my mirrors, half expecting someone to appear from behind a bush or tree, but no one did. I drove out of there as fast as I could without risking a crash. Once I hit the main road, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, paranoid that a car might be following me, but there wasn't any traffic around. It was late, and most people were probably home or out in busier parts of town. During the drive home, I replayed everything in my head. The strange lights, the broken branches, the footsteps, the whispers. I tried to come up with a normal explanation, but I had nothing that made sense. The part that really shook me was the car door. I didn't see any reason for them to open it, look through my glove compartment, and then leave it at that. There was no money in there, just registration papers, receipts, and a map. They didn't even take the change. It felt like they wanted to show me they were there, that they had enough time and opportunity to search my car without me catching them. When I finally got home, I parked in my garage and sat there for a minute, letting my breathing slow. My body was tense and my head ached. I couldn't stop thinking about the flashlights blinking in the distance and the way they shut off whenever I tried to approach. The memory of those rapid footsteps and the sudden rush of movement in the trees made my skin crawl. The feeling of being watched still clung to me, even in my own garage. Since that night, I haven't gone back up that trail so late. I usually stick to daylight hikes, or I bring a friend if I plan to stay out for sunset. I can't shake the memory of those irregular flashlight signals. I keep wondering what those people wanted, why they were out there, and why they decided to break into my car just to rummage around and leave everything behind. I never found an answer, but every time I drive past that trailhead, now I feel that subtle wave of anxiety wash over me. I picture those strange beams of light blinking in the dark, followed by rustling branches and quick footsteps. It's not a story I like to tell too often, but every time I think about it, my heart starts beating faster and my palms get a little damp. That night changed the way I look at that mountain, and it reminded me that sometimes the biggest threats aren't wild animals or tricky trails. Sometimes it's the unexpected presence of other people who don't want to be seen and whose intentions aren't clear. I'm just glad I got out of there in one piece. I don't know what would have happened if I tried to confront whoever was up there in the end. I guess I'm lucky I only lost a bit of peace of mind and nothing else, but I'll never forget those lanterns blinking in the dark, and I don't think I ever want to be on that trail. After sunset again, I bought the car last month on a quiet weekday afternoon. It was supposed to be a simple transaction. The seller was an older guy, probably in his late 60s, with a calm voice and a polite smile. He told me he had taken good care of the vehicle. I glanced at the exterior, checked the mileage, and listened to the engine. Everything sounded good. I wasn't worried about. The faint smell inside, I assumed it was just an older car odor. I handed him the money and he handed me the paperwork. He gave me a quick handshake and said he hoped I'd enjoy the ride. He looked honest. He left without lingering. When I first got in the driver's seat, I felt a slight sense of excitement. The engine started without any stutter, the gears shifted smoothly, the brakes were responsive. I drove around for a few blocks to get a feel for it, and I noticed a few little quirks, like the rattling sound near the trunk when I hit a speed bump and a slight musty smell that got stronger. If I turned the AC on high, I also realized the glove box was locked. There was no key for it on the ring. The old guy gave me, it wasn't a big deal. At first I thought I'd get it open. Eventually the next day I made an appointment with a mechanic for a more thorough inspection. He didn't find anything wrong except for some worn belts that needed replacing. He also noticed the locked glove box. I told him the seller didn't give me a key for it. The mechanic shrugged and said I could have a locksmith open it if I wanted. We laughed and moved on. I was more concerned about the belts I paid for the replacements and left the shop feeling confident about my purchase over the next week. I drove the car daily. I used it for work errands and short weekend trips. It handled well. Fuel economy was decent, but that weird smell never went away. At times, it reminded me of old carpet or stale air, but there was something else, too. I couldn't place it. I tried air fresheners. I left the windows open in my garage. Still, the odor lingered. It clung to the upholstery and got into my clothes. Sometimes one afternoon, I pulled at the seats checking for mold or anything obvious, I didn't find any spills or stains. Everything looked normal. The smell stayed that same week. I decided to deal with the glove box. I went to a local locksmith. He said he could open it in a few minutes with the right tools. I gave him permission, and I stood there while he picked the lock. I heard the subtle clicks of his picks, and then he turned the latch. The glove box popped open. I leaned over to see what was inside. There was an envelope that looked thick, along with a small set of keys attached to a keyring. The locksmith handed me. "Both," he said. "Looks like you found something interesting," and then gave me a chuckle. I paid him and left. I got back into the car with the envelope on my lap. I was curious, but also a little uneasy. I opened it right away inside. There were handwritten notes on small pieces of paper and several newspaper clippings. The headlines on the clippings were vague phrases like "local man questioned an alleged break-in and unusual incident at storage facility" caught my eye. I flipped through them quickly. The dates were from a few months ago. One note had a phone number with no name. Another was just an address scrolled in shaky handwriting. The rest were random scribbles, some I couldn't read. The small set of keys was another mystery. None of them looked like house keys. They were different shapes and sizes, like they belonged to old locks or specialized doors. I felt a surge of confusion. That night I tried to call the phone number from the note. It rang without an answer. No voicemail. I tried again. Same result. I checked the address on my phone's map. It was about 30 minutes away in a part of the city I didn't visit often. There was nothing famous in that area, just some warehouses and industrial buildings. I told myself I should ignore it, but it kept bothering me. Why would the old guy leave this stuff in the glove box and not mention it the next morning? I called him. He picked up on the second ring. I introduced myself again and asked him about the envelope. He paused for a second. His voice sounded strained. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about. There was nothing in the glove box when I owned it." Then he quickly added that he had to go and hung up. The way he spoke felt forced. I didn't believe him the next few days. I started feeling nervous on Thursday. I found a note on my windshield. It said, "Did you find the missing pieces?" No signature, no explanation. The handwriting was neat. I looked around the parking lot to see if anyone was watching. No one seemed suspicious. I shoved the note in my pocket and went about my day, but I kept looking over my shoulder. My stomach felt tight. My hands were shaking a bit whenever I thought about it. That night I lay in bed wide awake. I wondered if someone was stalking me or trying to intimidate me. I told myself it might be some prank, but I didn't believe that either. The next morning I saw a black SUV parked across the street from my house. It wasn't one I recognized when I stepped outside. The SUV drove off slowly. I tried to memorize the license plate, but I could only catch the first few digits. The rest was too blurry. At that distance, my heart pounded. I walked up to my car, checked the doors, checked the windows. Everything was locked. Nothing was tampered with. I got in and drove to work. On the way, I kept looking in the rearview mirror. At one point, I thought I saw the same black SUV, but it turned off at an intersection. I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. Later that day, I received another anonymous message, this time on my phone. It was a text that said, "You found some things, but not everything. Are you going to keep looking?" I felt a jolt in my chest. How did they get my number? My hands went clammy. My mind raced. I replied with one word, "Who?" No answer came. I stared at my phone for a good 10 minutes, waiting for a response that never arrived. That evening, I decided to check the trunk for any hidden compartments. I pulled up the spare tire cover. I tapped around the corners. The trunk was plain. I shined a flashlight under the seats from the back. I didn't see anything unusual. The only mystery that remained was the smell. The envelope, the strange keys, and those newspaper clippings. I went back inside my house, placed everything on my kitchen table, and studied each piece one by one. I lined up the notes, tried to see if they formed some sequence. I read each clipping carefully. They mentioned a series of break-ins at storage units around the city. Police had questioned several suspects, but no one was charged. One note had a partial list of names, but no last names. Another note said, "Check unit number 17." Another one said, "K, possibly." My pulse quickened. I glanced at the small set of keys again. I couldn't decide if I should call the police. I thought about dropping everything off at a station and explaining the situation, but I worried they might think I was involved in something illegal. I also felt a strange urge to figure this out myself. I reasoned that if there was real danger, it might be better to keep my guard up and see if I could uncover the truth on Saturday morning. I drove to the address I had found in the notes. It led me to a row of warehouses in a rundown industrial park. The place looked almost deserted. Most of the buildings were gray with rusted loading docks and empty parking lots. I parked on the street, my hands were sweating. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest. I got out of the car and walked around trying not to look suspicious. The address on the note corresponded to a metal door near the back of one warehouse. There were numbers stenkled above the door. It matched the address exactly. I tried one of the keys on the ring. It didn't fit. I tried another. No luck, then a third still no. The lock looked old. My shoulders felt tense. I glanced around to make sure nobody was watching. I noticed a camera mounted near the corner of the building pointing toward a loading bay. I couldn't tell if it was active. I heard an engine somewhere behind me. I turned around and saw a dark SUV moving down a side street. I couldn't be sure if it was the same one, but a surge of panic shot through me. I hurried back to my car. I left the area and drove home. Checking my mirrors every few seconds, if they were following me, I couldn't see them after a while, but that didn't make me feel better. My hands shook on the steering wheel. My breathing was shallow. I got home and locked my doors that night. I received another text. "You're on the right track. Don't get scared." Now my legs felt weak when I read it. I didn't know if I should call someone or just ignore it. I decided to block the number the next morning. I found another note on my front door. This time it said, "Go to the police or find out the truth. Either way, you're involved now. No signature, no explanation." I looked around my porch. The neighborhood was quiet. I ran inside, heart pounding. I started packing the envelope, the keys, and all the notes into a small box. I thought about heading to the police station. Right then I even grabbed my car keys, but I stood there in my living room, unable to move. I took a breath. I told myself to calm down. I decided to call the old owner one more time. The phone rang several times before he answered. His voice was low. I asked him why he sold me the car. If he knew there was something inside. He repeated that he had no idea what I was talking about. I told him about the notes, the keys, the texts. His voice got shaky. He said, "I'm sorry, I can't help you," and hung up. He sounded scared. That made me even more on edge. I spent the next hour pacing around my house. I checked all my windows, locked them, and peeked outside every few minutes to see if that SUV would show up again. The box with the envelope and keys was on my coffee table. My phone sat next to it, silent. I felt a knot in my stomach. I imagined someone creeping around outside. I pulled the blind shut. My breathing was fast. I tried to steady myself by focusing on basic tasks, making coffee, washing. A few dishes, turning on the TV for background noise. Eventually, I grabbed the box and walked out to my car. My plan was to go to the police station. As soon as I backed out of my driveway, I noticed the same black SUV rolling slowly down my street. My hands started shaking again, and I dropped my phone between the seats. I tried to focus on driving. I turned in the opposite direction of the SUV, and I took a winding route through side streets. I kept glancing in my mirrors. The SUV didn't appear again. After a few turns, I realized I was basically driving in circles. My heart pounded in my ears. I stopped in a parking lot behind a shopping center. I picked up my phone from under the seat and sat there breathing heavily. I opened the box on the passenger seat and looked at the clippings again. I had this strong urge to know what the old man had gotten himself into. I thought about the text telling me I was already involved. I felt that was true. I wasn't sure how deep this went. My chest felt tight. I wiped sweat off my forehead and told myself I needed to make a decision. Right then, a new text popped up. It was from an unknown number. Again, they're watching you. Be careful. My stomach flipped. I started the car and drove straight to the nearest police station. I parked outside and just stared at the building. I pictured myself walking in with this box trying to explain how I got it. I wondered if they'd believe me. My head was throbbing. I turned off the ignition. My breathing was shallow. I clenched the steering wheel for a few seconds. Trying to collect my thoughts, I looked around the parking lot. A few police cruisers were parked there. I saw an officer step out of the station and light a cigarette. He looked tired. I looked at the box on my seat. I felt this overwhelming sense of doubt. My phone chimed again. Another unknown message. You can walk in there, but think about who else is inside. I felt sick to my stomach. I stared at the station doors. I stared at my phone. I turned the key in the ignition again. My hands were trembling. I backed out of the parking space and left, driving away from the station with my heart racing. I didn't know who was behind those messages. I didn't know why they seemed so sure I shouldn't trust anyone. All I knew was that the car I'd bought, which should have been a simple used vehicle, was now a constant source of stress. I realized I couldn't live like this much longer. I needed answers. I pulled into my driveway, parked, and locked the doors. I took the box into my house that night. I barely slept every time I heard a noise outside. I jumped. My body felt tense. My muscles ached and my mind wouldn't stop racing. All I could think was that at any moment someone could appear at my door demanding that envelope. Those notes and those keys, I didn't know if I was in real danger or if this was just intimidation, but it felt real. My palms were sweaty, my head pounded. Now I'm sitting here with that box on my kitchen table. Again, I hear a car passing outside. I go to the window and look through the blinds. It's a regular sedan, not the SUV. Still, my heart is pounding. I look at the clock on the wall. It's well after midnight. I can't decide if I should pick up the phone and try the police again or if I should push further on my own. The car outside in the driveway seems harmless, but I can't help feeling like it's a trap waiting to close in on me. My phone is on silent, face down on the table. The envelope is on top of the box. The keys are inside, rattling around every time I move the box even a little. I'm tense all over. I feel like I'm being cornered by a secret I never asked for. I don't know if I'll ever get rid of this fear unless I uncover the whole story or finally hand everything over to the authorities. But right now I'm just sitting here trying to breathe, waiting for something else to happen. I keep expecting another text, another note, or maybe a knock on my door. And I have no idea which will come first. I never saw him coming. I was just looking for a quiet place to have a beer and unwind after a long day of meetings. I'm not from the city. I'm here for a 3-day conference, and I didn't want to waste time searching for a fancy place. I found a small bar in a narrow street a few blocks from my hotel. It had a faded sign over the door, a couple of stools by the entrance, and a single neon light in the window that blinked every few seconds. It felt a little rundown, but I didn't care. I stepped inside and took a seat at the counter. The bar was almost empty. A bartender stood at one end flipping through a sports magazine. There were a few tables in the back, mostly unoccupied, with dim lights. Casting a weak glow, the air smelled like stale beer-fried food and old wood. I ordered a beer, then sat quietly scrolling through my phone for a bit. My shoulders were tense from sitting in conference rooms all day, and I just wanted to relax. After a few minutes, I noticed a man standing near me. He was a bit taller than me, late 30s or early 40s, wearing a dark hoodie and jeans. He smiled when I glanced in his direction. I gave him a polite nod. He moved closer and leaned against the bar. He looked at me like he was sizing me up. I didn't think much of it at first. People in bars sometimes chat about random stuff, and I figured he was just bored. He said rough day. His voice sounded casual, maybe a bit. Rough. I shrugged. A long day at work. I'm not from here. I tried to keep it simple. I didn't feel like giving too many details, but I also didn't want to seem unfriendly. He laughed a bit. Yeah, I can see you're not from around here. You look exhausted. I nodded. Had meetings all day, just wanted a beer. He asked if I was traveling alone. I felt a slight twist in my stomach. His question seemed a little direct, but I told him I was alone because it was a business trip. I didn't give him a full answer, just said something like, yeah, it's just me. and I tried to move the conversation to something else. He introduced himself with a name that I barely caught. It sounded like Lou or Lou, but the music in the background was low and the bartender coughed around the same time, so I wasn't sure. I just nodded and said, "Nice to meet you." He didn't seem to mind that I wasn't sure about his name. He gave me a friendly grin, then asked, "Were you staying downtown?" I hesitated. I didn't want to lie outright, but I also didn't feel comfortable giving him my hotel name or location, so I answered vaguely, "Yeah, near downtown, it's convenient." I sipped my beer and kept my eyes on the TV in the corner, hoping he'd drop it. He moved closer, tilting his head. "Yeah, which hotel? There's a bunch of them around here. I got some friends who work at a few. Maybe you got a good deal." I felt my heartbeat pick up. I tried to keep my voice calm. "I don't remember the name," I said, looking away. "My company booked it. It's just an average place." He chuckled. "Man, how do you not know your own hotel's name?" He said it in a joking tone, but I sensed a push behind his words. I kept quiet, took another sip, and checked my phone like I got a message. He watched me waiting for a better answer when I didn't give him one. He nudged my arm lightly. "Come on, you can tell me," he said. "I'm not going to rob you in your sleep or anything." My neck felt stiff. I noticed my mouth was dry even though I'd been drinking. I forced a laugh. "I'm sure you're not," I said, trying to sound casual. "It's just some random hotel, nothing special." He stared at me for a moment. He had light-colored eyes. The bar's weak light gave them a pale, almost grayish tint. Then he said, "You here for long?" I shook my head. "A couple days, then I'm out." He kept pressing, "Got family waiting for you back home?" I felt a sudden urge to get out of my seat. Something about his questions made me uncomfortable. They weren't standard small talk. He was zeroing in on personal details. I put my beer down half empty and said, "Excuse me, I got to use the restroom." He stepped aside, letting me pass, but he was slow about it as I walked by. I felt his hand tap my shoulder in a weirdly familiar way, like we were friends. I didn't like it. I tried not to show it. Just nodded and walked to the back. In the restroom, I splashed water on my face. I stared at myself in the mirror. I felt a knot in my stomach and my pulse was a bit fast. I told myself it was no big deal. Just some guy who was a little too curious, but I couldn't ignore the tension in my shoulders. Something about this situation was off. When I came out, I saw the man at the bar again. He was flipping through the same sports magazine the bartender had. The bartender was nowhere in sight. Maybe taking a breakout back. I thought maybe this was my chance to leave. I walked toward the door, and just as I reached for the handle, I heard his voice behind me. "Leaving already?" he asked. I turned around. He was standing right behind me, closer than before. I could smell the beer on his breath. It wasn't overwhelming, but it was strong enough to notice. I tried to smile. "Yeah, early morning tomorrow," I said. "Got to get some rest." He nodded, but then he put his hand on the door, holding it shut. He did it casually, like he was just leaning on it, but I knew he was blocking me. His other hand patted my shoulder again. I froze for a second. My mind raced. I thought about stepping back, maybe even pushing him aside. If it got physical, but he didn't look violent. He just seemed like he wanted control of the situation. "You got time for one more beer?" He said. "Let me buy you one. It's not that late." My throat felt tight. I forced a quick smile and shook my head. "I appreciate it, but I'm done for the night. Maybe tomorrow." He let out a short laugh. "Tomorrow, so you'll be around then." Good to know. He reached for the door knob and opened it slightly. "All right, man, take care." I slipped out, feeling that rush in my chest. Like I'd just run up a flight of stairs. The sidewalk was dimly lit, with a single streetlight flickering above. A couple cars passed on the main road. In the distance, the bar was on a side street, so there wasn't much foot traffic. I took a breath and started walking toward my hotel as I moved away from the bar. I kept looking over my shoulder. I didn't see him. At first, I told myself not to panic, but I was on alert. I walked faster. Heading around the corner onto a better-lit street, a pair of late-night diners passed me, not paying me any attention. I tried to calm down, then I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced back and saw him about 20 feet behind. Walking at a steady pace, he had his hoodie pulled up now, hiding part of his face. My heart pounded. I tried to keep my steps even. Not to break into a sprint, I didn't want to call attention or seem afraid, but I was definitely nervous. My palms were sweating. I kept checking behind me. He never got too close, but he wasn't stopping either. He followed my turn, staying at roughly the same distance every time I looked back. He caught my eye. He wasn't on his phone, he was focused on me. I reached a busier street. There were more lights, a few storefronts, and a couple of late-night cafes. I walked past a convenience store and thought about going inside to lose him, but then I realized he might just wait around. I also didn't want to get trapped in there. I decided to keep going toward my hotel. I hoped he would stop following me once I reached the main street. When I got closer to the hotel, I saw the tall building sign lit up. Relief washed over me for a second, but then I remembered how insistent he was about knowing where I stayed. I realized that if he followed me all the way, he'd figure out exactly where I was sleeping. I felt stuck. I didn't have a plan to shake him off, and I was tired from the day I considered ducking into another business. But it was late and not many places were open. The few that were had minimal people inside. I doubted I could hide without him noticing as I neared the hotel entrance. He closed the distance slightly. I could feel him behind me. I was maybe half a block away. My chest felt tight. I looked at the revolving doors of the lobby. There was a security guard at the front desk, and I thought about calling out for help, but that seemed extreme. He hadn't actually attacked me. He was just following me. I decided to move quickly, get inside and reach the elevator. At least the lobby had cameras and staff. I turned the corner and approached the hotel's main doors out of the corner of my eye. I noticed him slow down. He lingered near the side of the building next door. I pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the bright lobby. The security guard glanced up from behind his station. I nodded, tried to act normal, and made my way to the elevator bank. My hands were shaking a bit. I pressed the button and waited. Nobody else was in the lobby. The elevator took a moment to arrive. I was breathing faster than normal, and my legs felt a little shaky. When the elevator doors opened, I stepped inside and hit my floor number. I felt an urge to look back to see if he was there, but the reflective surfaces of the elevator walls only showed me the doors closed, and I realized my shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. In my room, I tossed my stuff on the bed and went straight to the window. I pushed the curtain aside and looked down at the street from my angle. I could see part of the sidewalk and a bit of the corner where I came from. I stood there for a good minute scanning the area. Then I saw him. He was leaning against a street lamp on the corner with his hood still up, looking in the direction of the hotel he was still watching. I couldn't tell if he saw me, but I had a clear view of him. I swallowed hard and stepped back. Not wanting to be visible if he looked up, my mind was racing. I was mad at myself for being so careless. I was also worried about what he was planning. I had no idea if he wanted to rob me, scam me, or just creep me out. I checked the time on my phone. It was almost midnight. I wondered how long he would stay there. I thought about calling the front desk or maybe the local police, but I wasn't sure if they would do anything. He hadn't threatened me outright. He hadn't tried to break in. He was just standing there, watching. I locked my door chain and double-checked the handle. Then I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, listening to the hum of the air conditioner. After a few minutes, I got up and looked out the window again. He hadn't moved much, still near that corner. I couldn't see his face well because of the hood, but it was clear he was looking toward the hotel's entrance. At one point, he moved a few steps, then stopped. I watched him for another couple minutes, my heartbeat still thumping like I'd been running. Though I was just standing there, I tried to decide what to do next. I was definitely not going back outside. I figured my best bet was to stay put and be cautious. Maybe he'd give up and leave. I stepped away from the window, sat back down on the bed, and took off my shoes. I kept the lights off except for a small lamp on the nightstand every 5 minutes. I checked the street he was there for what felt like a long time. Finally, after about half an hour, I peeked again and didn't see him. I waited longer, straining my eyes at the sidewalk and around the corner. No sign of him. I didn't feel relief, though. My hands were still shaking a bit and my chest felt tight. I stayed by the window for a while just to be sure he wasn't lurking in a blind spot. Eventually, I closed the curtain, placed a chair against the door, and sat there in silence. I wondered if he knew my room number somehow, or if he would try to tail me again in the morning. I didn't sleep well that night. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. I checked the lock a few times, even though I knew it hadn't changed. I kept thinking about how he asked where I was staying and how long I'd be in town. The look on his face kept popping into my head, the way he grinned and made weird comments about trust it played on a loop until I finally dozed off. Exhausted in the morning, I checked out earlier than planned. I asked the front desk if there was a back entrance, and they pointed me to a side door near the parking garage. I slipped out that way. Scanning the area for any sign of him, I didn't see him still. I felt uneasy. I headed to the conference, dragging my luggage behind me, planning to leave for the airport. As soon as my last meeting finished, I didn't want to spend another night in that hotel. Not after seeing him there, I still wonder what that man's actual plan was. I don't know if he was just bored or if he had some trick up his sleeve the moment I realized he was following me to the hotel. Something in my gut told me this could have ended badly if I wasn't careful. His questions about whether I was alone, how long I'd be in town, which hotel I chose. None of it felt normal that night in the bar, the way he blocked my exit and kept touching my shoulder, the way he hovered near me with that forced grin. It all stayed with me. I can still picture him in that dark hoodie standing at the corner watching the front doors of my hotel. I'll never forget that feeling of being trapped, of walking faster and feeling his steps behind me in the empty streets. I still tense up when I think about it. I might have dodged something worse, or maybe it was just a strange encounter. Either way, I learned to trust that knot in my stomach. I learned to stay more alert in unfamiliar places. And if someone in a bar ever starts asking too many questions again, I'm out the door before they have a chance to follow me.